Welcome, whether you're new here or returning. This is a Scary Stories channel, and tonight's video brings long ghosts and haunted places stories told slowly to help you unwind. If you enjoy listening, like, subscribe, and comment your location. Settle in. Story 1. The House on Hemlock Lane. Has no windows on the inside. I should have known something was wrong when the real estate agent wouldn't step inside. She stood on the cracked concrete path leading to the front door, her sensible heels sinking slightly into the damp earth, and handed me the keys with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's a steal at this price," she said, her voice carefully neutral. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, original hardwood floors. Needs a little work, but the bones are solid. She gestured toward the house, a 2-story Victorian with peeling gray paint and a sagging porch, but made no move to approach it. "I'll just wait here while you take a look. Take your time." I was too desperate to question it. After 6 months of couch surfing and a savings account that had evaporated faster than morning dew, the rent of $450 a month for an entire house felt like divine intervention. I'd seen the listing online. Charming fixer-upper on quiet lane. Utilities included. Immediate occupancy. No photos, just the address on Hemlock Lane, a street I'd never heard of on the forgotten edge of town where the pavement gave way to gravel and the houses grew farther apart, as if each one were trying to escape its neighbors. The house itself was exactly as described on the outside. It had the silhouette of a proper Victorian, steep gabled roof, decorative gingerbread trim along eaves, a wraparound porch with spindle railings, and windows. Plenty of windows. 4 on the front facade alone, their glass dark and reflective in the afternoon light. But as I climbed the porch steps, the floorboards groaning under my weight, I noticed something odd. The windows had no sills, no interior frames visible through the glass, just smooth, unbroken walls meeting the glass at a perfect seal, like the windows had been painted onto the house rather than built into it. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The interior was immaculate, not dusty or neglected, but unnervingly clean. The hardwood floors gleamed as if recently polished. The walls were painted a soft, buttery yellow. The air smelled faintly of lemon and beeswax. It was a comfortable, even welcoming space. The living room to my left with a brick fireplace, a dining room straight ahead, a narrow hallway leading toward what I assumed was the kitchen. But as I turned in a slow circle, my eyes scanning the walls, a cold knot tightened in my stomach. There were no windows, not a single one. I walked to the front wall where I knew a large bay window should be based on the exterior, my hand pressed against cool, smooth plaster. I knocked. Solid. I ran my fingers along the wall, searching for seams, for the outline of a frame hidden beneath the paint. Nothing, just seamless, unbroken walls stretching from floor to ceiling. I moved to the other walls of the living room. Same thing. The dining room, same. I hurried down the hallway to the kitchen, my footsteps echoing in the unnatural silence. The kitchen had cabinets, a vintage stove, a porcelain sink, but no window above it, no window on any wall. I ran upstairs, taking the steps 2 at a time, my heart hammering against my ribs. The bedrooms were identical. Perfectly proportioned, freshly painted, furnished with simple wooden beds and dressers, and completely, utterly windowless. I stood in the center of the master bedroom, breathing hard, and looked toward where the front-facing window should have been. Through the wall, I knew, was the street, the real estate agent, the afternoon sun, but here, inside, there was only yellow-painted plaster. I pressed my ear against it. I heard nothing, not the distant hum of traffic, not the chirp of birds, not the whisper of wind through leaves, just silence, a thick, cottony silence that seemed to swallow sound the moment it left my body. I ran back downstairs and out the front door, stumbling onto the porch. The agent was still standing exactly where I'd left. Her, checking her phone. She looked up as I emerged, her expression carefully blank. "There are no windows inside," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. She nodded slowly, as if I'd just confirmed something she already knew. "The listing mentioned it's a unique property." "Unique? There are windows on the outside. I can see them, but inside, nothing, just walls." "Some people find it cozy," she said, tucking her phone into her pocket. "No drafts, no prying eyes, complete privacy." She took a step toward me, her voice dropping. "Look, I'm required to tell you the house has a history. The previous owner, an elderly woman named Agnes Hemlock, lived here alone for 60 years. She had a condition, photophobia, extreme sensitivity to light. Over the decades, she sealed every window from the inside, plastered over them, built false walls. By the time she passed, the interior had been completely reconfigured. The windows exist structurally. They're part of the building's integrity. But the interior spaces were redesigned to eliminate them entirely. It was a plausible explanation. Bizarre, but plausible. And I was desperate. I looked back at the house, at its windows gleaming in the sun, at its promise of shelter at a price I could actually afford. I thought of another night on my friend's lumpy sofa, of the pity in their eyes when they thought I wasn't looking. "I'll take it," I said. I moved in that weekend. My few boxes of belongings looked pathetic in the spacious, windowless rooms, but for the first time in months, I had walls of my own. I bought blackout curtains for the doors, the front door, the back door, even the bathroom door, just to feel like I had some control over the light entering the space. During the day, I kept the front door propped open with a brick, letting in sunlight and the sounds of the world. It helped. It made the house feel less like a tomb and more like a home. The first night was the hardest. I closed the door at sunset, latched it securely, and turned on every lamp in the house. The yellow walls glowed warmly in the artificial light. I made dinner, read a book, tried to settle into a rhythm, but as midnight approached, the silence began to change. It wasn't just an absence of sound anymore, it was a presence, a weight pressing against my eardrums. I found myself straining to hear something, anything, a car passing on the lane, an owl calling in the woods behind the house. But there was nothing. The house didn't just block light, it blocked sound. It existed in a bubble of perfect isolation. I woke at 3:17 a.m. to the sound of tapping. It was faint, rhythmic, coming from somewhere deep within the house. Tap, 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 like a fingernail against glass. I sat up in bed, my breath shallow. The sound stopped immediately. I waited, listening. Nothing. I told myself it was the house settling, pipes contracting in the cool night air. I lay back down. Tap, 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 tap. This time, it was closer. From the hallway outside my bedroom door, I froze, my body rigid beneath the covers. The tapping continued for exactly 12 seconds, then ceased. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, I examined the walls with a new intensity. I ran my hands over every inch of plaster, searching for seams, for the faintest outline of where a window frame might be hidden. In the living room, on the north wall, I found it. A hairline crack running vertically for about 4 feet, so fine I'd missed it before. I pressed against the wall beside it. Solid. But when I pushed directly on the crack, the plaster gave slightly. Not much, just a millimeter or two, but enough to tell me there was a cavity behind it. My rational mind screamed at me to stop, to call the agent, to break my lease and leave, but a deeper, more primal part of me needed to know. What was behind that wall? What had Agnes Hemlock sealed away? That afternoon, I went to the hardware store and bought a pry bar and a utility knife. When I returned, the house felt different. Not hostile exactly, but watchful. As I stood in the living room with my tools, I had the distinct sensation of being observed from within the walls themselves. I started with the crack. The utility knife sliced through the plaster cleanly, revealing not lath and plaster beneath, but smooth, cool glass, a window pane. I widened the hole carefully, working in a circle until I'd exposed a space about the size of a dinner plate. Behind the glass was darkness. Not the darkness of a covered window, the soft, ambient darkness of a room with curtains drawn. This was absolute, lightless. I pressed my face close to the hole, my breath fogging the glass. And then I saw it. A face, pale and gaunt, pressed against the other side of the glass. Its eyes were wide, unblinking, the pupils dilated to black pools. Its mouth was slightly open, as if frozen in the act of drawing a breath. It was inches from my face, separated only by the pane of glass. I stumbled backward with a choked cry, falling onto the hardwood floor. When I looked again, the face was gone. Only darkness remained. I spent the next hour in a cold sweat, convinced I'd imagined it. Stress, sleep deprivation, the power of suggestion in a strange new place. But as evening fell, and I sat in the living room with all the lamps blazing, I saw movement in my peripheral vision, a flicker of pale skin against a yellow wall. I turned my head sharply. Nothing. I looked away. In my periphery again, the suggestion of a figure standing where the hidden window was. I whipped my head back. Empty wall. It only appeared when I wasn't looking directly at it. I didn't sleep that night either. I sat in a chair facing the wall with a hidden window, a baseball bat across my knees, every lamp in the house burning bright. At 2:44 a.m., I saw it clearly for the first time. Not in my periphery, but reflected in the dark screen of my laptop. A woman in a faded, floral dress standing behind me, her hands pressed against the wall from the other side. Her face was the same one I'd seen through the hole. Agnes Hemlock. Her eyes weren't malevolent. They were desperate, terrified. She was mouthing words I couldn't hear through the glass and plaster. I fled the house at dawn, driving to a 24-hour diner on the other side of town. Over coffee that tasted like ash, I did what I should have done weeks ago. I researched Agnes Hemlock. The local historical society had digitized old newspapers. I found her obituary first. Agnes Marie Hemlock, age 94, died peacefully in her sleep. Survived by no one. She'd been born in the house on Hemlock Lane in 1922 and never left. The article mentioned her reclusiveness, her aversion to sunlight, her decades of solitude. but it was a police report from 1957 that made my blood run cold. On October 12, 1957, Agnes Hemlock had reported her husband, Thomas, missing. He'd left for work that morning and never returned. The police investigation turned up nothing, no evidence of foul play, no sightings, no body. The case went cold. But neighbors reported hearing arguments from the house in the weeks before Thomas vanished. And one neighbor, an elderly woman named Clara Finch, gave a statement that was never followed up on. I saw Thomas that morning. He was standing at the living room window, waving at me like he was saying goodbye. But when I waved back, he just kept waving. His face was pressed against the glass. And then Agnes came up behind him and pulled the curtain shut. I never saw him again. I sat in the diner for 3 hours, my mind racing. Thomas Hemlock hadn't left for work that day. He'd been sealed inside the walls, behind the windows. Agnes hadn't covered the windows to keep light out. She'd covered them to keep something in, or to hide what she'd done. I returned to the house at noon, the sun high in the sky. I told myself I was leaving for good. I would pack my essentials and never return. But as I stood in the living room with my suitcase open on the floor, I heard it again, the tapping. Not frantic or threatening, but slow, deliberate. Tap, pause, tap, pause, tap. And beneath it, a whisper so faint it might have been the wind, if there had been any wind inside this soundless box. Help. Me. I approached the wall slowly. I pressed my ear against the plaster beside the hole I'd cut. At first, nothing. Then, a breath. Cold air against my skin, seeping through the microscopic gap between plaster and glass, and a voice, cracked with age and despair. She bricked me in, October 12th, 1957. She told me she couldn't bear to be alone, that I would stay with her forever. Thomas Hemlock had been trapped behind the walls for 69 years, not dead, not alive, suspended in the space between the house's exterior and interior, in the narrow cavity where windows should have been, preserved by the complete absence of light and air, by the perfect seal Agnes had created. He was a prisoner in the architecture itself. "Why show yourself to me?" I whispered, my lips against the wall. A long pause. Then, "You looked. No one has looked in decades. They just live here. They don't see the walls. They don't listen. You looked." I spent the next week in a state of quiet negotiation with the house. During a day with the front door open, Thomas was silent. But at night, when the house sealed itself in darkness and silence, he would speak to me through the walls. He told me about his life before the sealing, his job at the lumber yard, his love of gardening, the way Agnes's jealousy had grown like a vine around their marriage until it strangled everything. He told me about the moment of his entombment, not violent, but chillingly domestic. Agnes had asked him to help her repair a loose window pane. As he leaned out to examine the frame, she'd shoved a pre-cut piece of plywood against the opening from inside, nailing it shut before he could pull himself back in. Then she'd plastered over the entire window, sealing him in the narrow space between the outer wall and the inner surface. "She visits sometimes," Thomas whispered one night. "Not her body, her presence. She comes to check on me, to make sure I'm still here. She can't bear the thought of me leaving, even now." I knew then what I had to do. I couldn't live in this house knowing what was trapped within its walls. But I couldn't leave Thomas here either. He'd suffered enough. I bought a sledgehammer. I started with the living room wall, the one with a hole I'd already cut. The first swing of the hammer sent a shock up my arms and a cloud of plaster dust into the air. The second swing cracked the lath beneath. By the fifth swing, I'd created an opening large enough to see through. The space behind the wall was about 8 inches deep, the exact width of a window frame. And there he was, Thomas Hemlock, or what remained of him. His body was desiccated, mummified by decades of dry, lightless air. His clothes hung on his skeletal frame, the fabric brittle with age. His face was pressed against the inner surface of the outer wall, against the glass of the window that looked out onto Hemlock Lane. His eyes were closed. His hands were raised as if still pushing against the barrier that had trapped him. But he wasn't alone. Standing behind him, her translucent form pressed against his back, was Agnes. Her face was a mask of possessive love, her arms wrapped around his waist in an eternal embrace. She wasn't a monster. She was a woman who had loved too hard, who had preferred a preserved ghost to an empty house. And she was still here, still keeping watch over her husband, still ensuring he never left her. As I stared into that narrow cavity, Agnes turned her head slowly. Her eyes met mine through the broken wall. There was no anger in them, only profound sadness and a warning. I raised the sledgehammer again, my arms trembling with exhaustion and terror. I brought it down on the outer wall, on the glass itself. The window shattered outward, raining shards onto the porch below. A flood of afternoon light poured into the cavity, illuminating decades of dust and despair. Thomas's body crumbled instantly, not to dust, but to a fine gray powder that drifted softly to the floor of the cavity. His form dissolved in the light he hadn't seen in 69 years, and as he vanished, Agnes's form flickered. Her expression shifted from sorrow to something like relief. She looked at the space where her husband had been, then back at me. She smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile, before fading into nothingness. The house exhaled. The silence changed. It was no longer a presence, but simply an absence of sound. The weight lifted from my shoulders. I finished the job that afternoon. I broke through every wall where I suspected a window lay hidden. 6 in total. Each cavity held the same story. A life interrupted, a love twisted into imprisonment, a decades-long vigil in the dark. With each window I uncovered, with each flood of light I allowed into those secret spaces, another ghost was released, another burden lifted from the house's bones. I still live in the house on Hemlock Lane. The rent is still $450 a month. The real estate agent never followed up. Sometimes, in the deep quiet of night, I think I hear a faint tapping. But it's different now. Not desperate, not trapped. Just a reminder, a thank you. The house has windows again. Real ones. I installed them myself after tearing down the false walls. Sunlight streams across the yellow-painted floors. I can see the trees in the yard, the occasional car passing on the lane, the stars at night. The house breathes now. It lives. But sometimes, when I'm washing dishes at the kitchen sink, I catch a flicker of movement in the reflection of the window glass. 2 figures, a man and a woman, standing together. On the other side of the pane, looking out at the world they missed for so long. They don't speak. They don't reach for me. They just stand there side by side, watching the sunset. And then they fade leaving only my own reflection staring back. The house on Hemlock Lane has windows on the inside now, but I keep one wall untouched, the north wall of the living room. I've patched the hole I made that first day, but I haven't restored the false wall. Sometimes, when the light hits it just right, I can still see the faint outline of a face in the plaster. Not trapped, not suffering, just waiting. And I know that some prisons aren't meant to be broken. Some bonds survive even death. And some houses don't just hold memories, they hold the people who made them long after their bodies have turned to dust. I don't mind the company. After all, no one should have to be alone in the dark. Not even ghosts. Not even me. That brings this story to a close. Let's carry on to the next one. The woman in the photograph on the mantle changes position when no one is home. I inherited the house from my great-aunt Miriam, a woman I'd met exactly twice in my life. Once at my grandfather's funeral when I was 7, and again at her own wake, where she looked so peaceful in her casket I almost believed she was merely napping. The lawyer's letter arrived on a Tuesday, dry and formal, informing me that Miriam had left me her entire estate, a 3-story Victorian on Elm Street, all its contents, and a modest sum in a savings account that wouldn't cover 6 months of city rent, but felt like a fortune in this forgotten town. There were no conditions, no stipulations, just a simple bequest to her only living relative who might understand a quiet. I didn't understand a quiet then. I do now. The house was exactly as I remembered it from that single childhood visit, imposing, shadowed by ancient oaks, its gingerbread trim peeling like sunburnt skin. Inside, time had stopped sometime in the late 1980s. Floral wallpaper, avocado green appliances, furniture draped in yellowed sheets. Dust lay thick on every surface, undisturbed for years. It smelled of cedar, old paper, and something else. A faint, sweet scent like dried roses left too long in a vase. I spent the first week cleaning, airing out rooms, trying to make the place livable. On the third day, I tackled the living room. As I pulled the sheet off the fireplace mantle, a photograph caught my eye. It stood in a heavy silver frame, slightly tarnished, facing the room as if waiting for company. The photo was black and white, faded at the edges, showing a woman seated in a high-backed chair beside a potted fern. She wore a dress from the 1940s, high collar, cinched waist, and her hair was pinned neatly back. Her expression was serene, almost stern, but her eyes held a depth that seemed to follow me as I moved around the room. At the bottom of the frame, etched into the silver, were 2 words, Eleanor Voss. I assumed she was a relative, perhaps Miriam's mother or aunt. I placed the photo back on the mantle, centered it carefully, and continued my work. That evening, as I sat on the couch eating takeout, I glanced at the mantle. The photo was still there, but something was off. The woman wasn't sitting in the same position. In the morning, her hands had been folded neatly in her lap, one atop the other. Now, her right hand rested on the arm of the chair, fingers slightly curled. I frowned, set my fork down, and walked over. I picked up the frame. Nothing seemed disturbed, no smudges, no loose backing. I checked the photo itself. It was glued firmly to the cardboard backing. No way it could have shifted on its own. I reset her hands to their original position, pressing the photo flat just to be sure. I even took a picture of it with my phone for reference. Then I went to bed, chalking it up to faulty memory or a trick of the light. The next morning, before leaving for the hardware store, I checked the photo. Her hands were back in her lap, perfectly folded. Relief washed over me. I must have imagined the change yesterday. Stress, exhaustion, the mind playing tricks in an unfamiliar space. But when I returned home that afternoon, the photo had changed again. This time, her head was tilted slightly to the left, as if listening to someone just out of frame. Her eyes, which had previously gazed directly forward, now seemed to look toward the hallway leading to the kitchen. My skin prickled. I hadn't touched the frame all day. I'd been gone for 4 hours. I took another photo. Then I placed a small piece of tape across the seam between the glass and the frame. Subtle tamper seal. If the photo moved again, the tape would tear. I left the house the next morning for a doctor's appointment, locking the front door behind me. When I returned 2 hours later, the tape was intact, undisturbed, but the woman in the photograph was standing, not seated, standing. One hand rested on the back of the empty chair, the other hung loosely at her side. Her posture was relaxed, expectant, as if she'd just risen to greet a visitor. The chair behind her was empty. The potted fern remained in the corner of the frame, unchanged. Only she had moved. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't touch the frame. I didn't go near the mantle. I backed out of the living room and spent the rest of the day in the kitchen, jumping at every creak of the old house. That night, I researched Eleanor Voss. The local historical society had sparse records, but I found a marriage certificate from 1942. Eleanor Marie Voss to Arthur Holloway. The same Arthur Holloway whose disappearance I'd read about in the newspaper archives during my research on the closet house. A chill ran down my spine. Was this all connected? Or was I seeing patterns where none existed? I found more. A death notice from 1951. Eleanor Voss. Holloway, age 32, passed peacefully after a long illness. No cause of death, no mention of children, and buried in a police report from 1949. A neighbor's complaint that Eleanor had been seen walking the halls at night, talking to herself, rearranging furniture for guests who never came. I returned to the living room with a flashlight and examined the photo under direct light. The emulsion on the surface showed no signs of double exposure or manipulation. It was a single, genuine photograph from the 1940s, and yet the woman inside it was moving. The next day, I set up a camera. I propped my phone on a stack of books on the coffee table, aimed directly at the mantle, and activated continuous recording with motion detection. I left the house for 3 hours, running errands, my heart pounding the entire time. When I returned, I checked the footage. For the first 2 hours and 47 minutes, nothing happened. The photo sat undisturbed on the mantle. Then, at 2:47 p.m., the image on the screen flickered, not the phone screen, but the photograph itself. For a single frame, less than a 30th of a second, the woman was standing. Then she was seated again. The motion detector hadn't triggered because the movement wasn't physical. It was within the photograph. The camera had captured it only because it was recording continuously. I watched the clip 10 times. There was no glitch, no artifact. The woman had moved inside the frame, and the camera had seen it. That evening, I sat in the living room with all the lights on, staring at the photograph. Eleanor sat primly in a chair, hands folded, gaze forward. She looked harmless, sad even. I spoke aloud, my voice trembling slightly. "What do you want?" Nothing happened. The house was silent. After an hour, I went to bed. The next morning, the photo had changed again. She was seated, but now she was looking directly at the camera, directly at me, as if she'd turned her head to meet my gaze the moment I entered the room, and in her lap, resting on her folded hands, was a single white gardenia. I hadn't brought any flowers into the house. There were no gardenias in the yard. They don't grow in this climate. I left the flower where it was. I didn't touch the photo. I began to understand. She wasn't threatening me. She was communicating, responding. The changes weren't random. They were reactions to my presence, my absence, my attention. When I was home, she stayed still, observant. When I left, she moved, testing her boundaries, exploring her prison, waiting for me to return. One rainy afternoon, I decided to test her. I sat on the couch with a notebook and pen. "If you can hear me," I said clearly, "move your right hand to the arm of the chair." I waited 30 seconds, a minute, nothing. I sighed, about to give up, when slowly, so slowly, I almost missed it, her right hand lifted from her lap and settled on the chair's armrest. Movement was smooth, deliberate, as if performed by a living woman adjusting her posture. My hand shook as I wrote in the notebook, "Who are you?" This time, the response was faster. She rose from the chair entirely, turned to face the front of the frame, and pointed to the name etched into silver. "Eleanor Voss." "But you're Eleanor Holloway," I said. "You married Arthur." She shook her head. Just once, a sharp, definitive motion. Then she pointed to the name again. "Eleanor Voss. Unmarried, always Voss." I spent the next week in a strange, quiet dialogue with the woman in the photograph. I'd ask questions. She'd answer with gestures, shifts in posture, the occasional appearance of objects in the frame, a key, a letter, a child's hair ribbon. Through these fragments, her story emerged. She hadn't died of illness in 1951. She'd been murdered by Arthur. He'd discovered she was pregnant with another man's child, and in a fit of jealous rage, he'd pushed her down the stairs. To cover it up, he'd told everyone she was ill, kept her hidden in the attic until she died, then staged her peaceful passing. He'd buried her in the garden beneath the old oak tree, wrapped in her wedding dress, the one she'd refused to wear because she'd known even then that he was a monster. After her death, her spirit couldn't leave, not because she was bound to the house, but because she was bound to the lie. As long as the world believed she'd died peacefully, her truth remained buried. She needed someone to know, someone to witness, someone to say her name not as Eleanor Holloway, but as Eleanor Voss, the woman she was before he tried to erase her. And the photograph was her anchor, the only image of her that existed outside his narrative, the only proof she'd ever been real. The final piece came when I dug beneath the oak tree in the backyard. It took 2 days of careful digging, but I found it. All small, rusted lockbox containing a diary, a wedding ring, not hers, and a birth certificate for a daughter named Clara, born in secret in 1948 and given up for adoption to protect her from Arthur's wrath. The night I brought the box into the house, I placed it on the coffee table in front of the mantel. Eleanor's photograph changed instantly. She was no longer in the chair. She stood in the center of the frame, her hands clasped over her heart. tears streaming down her face, tears that hadn't been there a moment before, the first time I'd seen her cry. I opened the diary and read her final entry aloud. If anyone finds this, know that I was happy once. Know that I loved my daughter more than life itself. Know that my name is Eleanor Voss, and I was murdered by the man who claimed to love me. Say my name. Let the truth be known. When I finished, the photograph began to fade, not quickly, but gradually, like ink dissolving in water. Eleanor's form grew translucent, then ghostly, then nearly invisible. But her smile remained, the first and only time I'd seen her smile, a smile of peace, of release. By morning, the photograph was blank, just an empty chair, a potted fern, and a blank space where a woman had once sat, waited, and finally been heard. I keep the frame on the mantle still. Sometimes, in the late afternoon light, I swear I see the faint outline of a woman standing beside it, her hand resting gently on the silver edge. And on the coffee table, I've placed a fresh white gardenia every Sunday, not because she asks for it, but because some truths deserve to be remembered, some names deserve to be spoken, and some ghosts don't need to haunt houses. They just need someone to listen long enough to set them free. The woman in the photograph on the mantle changes position when no one is home. But now, when I'm home, I talk to the empty frame anyway, because I know she's listening, and because silence is the only thing that ever truly imprisoned her. That's where this story ends. Let's continue with the next. I moved into an apartment where the previous tenant never stopped paying rent. The ad was simple, almost too simple. Spacious 1BR downtown. Utilities included, $650 per month, available immediately. In a city where a shoebox studio cost twice that, it felt like a scam. But the photos were real. High ceilings, hardwood floors, a clawfoot tub in the bathroom. The building, a converted textile mill from the early 1900s, had been renovated just enough to be livable without losing its industrial bones. And the landlord, a soft-spoken man named Mr. Arden, seemed genuine over the phone. He didn't ask for a credit check or proof of income. He just wanted someone quiet and respectful to move in right away. Desperate for a place that wouldn't eat my entire paycheck, I signed a lease on a Tuesday and moved in that Friday. The apartment was exactly as advertised, clean, quiet, and inexplicably affordable. The only oddity was the mailbox in the lobby. It was an old brass unit with individual slots for each unit. My slot, 3B, was empty except for a single unopened envelope addressed to me, welcoming me to the building. But next to it, in slot 3A, a unit that, according to Mr. Arden, didn't exist, was a thick stack of mail. Bills, mostly, all addressed to a Mrs. Lillian Cade, and all stamped with the current month's date. I mentioned it to Mr. Arden when I saw him in the hallway that evening. He was carrying a toolbox, his hand stained with grease. He glanced at the mail slot, and his face tightened almost imperceptibly. "Oh, that," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Old system glitch. The Postal Service hasn't updated their records. Just ignore it. It'll stop soon." But it didn't stop. Every day a new envelope appeared in slot 3A. Always a bill, always paid. I saw the payment confirmations myself. The stubs were left behind in the slot after the main envelope was removed. $100 here for electricity, $50 there. For water, even a $200 check made out to the building management for monthly occupancy. The handwriting on the checks was elegant, looping cursive. The bank was local. The account was active. Curiosity got the better of me. One afternoon, while Mr. Arden was working on the boiler in the basement, I asked him about Mrs. Cade. He didn't look up from the pipes. "She was the last tenant in your apartment," he said, his voice flat. "Moved out a while ago. Left in a hurry. We never found a forwarding address. The payment started a few months later. We tried to stop them, but the bank says the account is in good standing and the payments are authorized. There's nothing we can do." A while ago turned out to be 3 years. I found out by asking Mrs. Gable, the elderly woman in 3C who'd lived in the building for 40 years. She met me in the hallway one morning, her eyes sharp behind thick glasses. "Lillian Cade," she said, her voice a dry whisper. Quiet. Girl. Kept to herself. Worked nights at the hospital. One day she just vanished. Didn't take her things. Left her cat. We had to find it a home. She paused, her gaze drifting to my door. Her rent's still being paid. From her account. Every single month. On the 1st. Like clockwork. That night, I lay in bed, listening to the silence of the old building. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a waiting silence. I thought about Lillian Cade paying for an apartment she hadn't seen in 3 years. Why? Was it a clerical error on a cosmic scale? Or was something else going on? The first sign that it was the latter came a week later. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I noticed my favorite mug. The blue one with the chipped handle was missing from the cupboard. I searched everywhere, under the sink, in the dishwasher, even in the living room. It was gone. That evening, as I was leaving for a walk, I passed the open door of the small closet in the hallway. I never used it. It was just deep enough for a broom and some cleaning supplies. But there, on the top shelf, sitting perfectly centered, was my blue mug. It was clean, dry, and filled with fresh water. My skin prickled. I hadn't put it there. I hadn't even known the closet shelf existed. I took the mug, emptied the water down the sink, and put it back in the cupboard. The next morning, it was back in the closet, filled with water again. Then it was my books. I kept a small stack of paperbacks on the nightstand. One morning, I found them neatly arranged on the windowsill in the living room, ordered by height. My running shoes, which I always left by the front door, were found one day tucked under my bed, laces tied in perfect bows. My spare key, which I kept on a hook by the kitchen, was discovered in the freezer wrapped in a tea towel. It wasn't malicious. It was meticulous, organized. It was the work of someone who knew the apartment intimately, who was trying to keep it in order, someone who still considered it home. I started leaving notes, little pieces of paper on the kitchen counter. "Thank you for tidying up, Elias." The next morning, the note would be gone, and in its place would be a single white gardenia on a saucer. I'd never seen a gardenia in this part of the city. They don't grow here. I began to research Lillian Cade. Public record showed she was a nurse at St. Vincent's Hospital. She had no criminal record, no debts, no social media presence. She was a ghost in life before she became one in death. The only anomaly was her bank account. It had a healthy balance, funded by automatic deposits from a source listed only as Memorial Trust. And every month, without fail, it sent out payments for an apartment she no longer occupied. One rainy Tuesday, I decided to visit St. Vincent's. I told the receptionist I was a friend of Lillian's, doing some genealogical research. The woman's face softened with recognition. Lillian Cade? Oh, honey, she was one of our best. Worked the night shift in palliative care. Had a way with the patients, you know. Made them feel not so alone. She leaned in, lowering her voice. She died right here, in the hospital, 3 years ago this month. Brain aneurysm. Came in complaining of a headache and was gone before her shift ended. They say her last words were, "I have to get home. My apartment needs cleaning." I walked back to the mill building in the rain, Lillian's last words echoing in my mind. She hadn't vanished. She'd died. And her spirit, or her consciousness, or whatever force was driving those monthly payments, was still anchored to her home. She was still taking care of it. And now she was taking care of me. The intrusions became more personal. One morning, I woke to find a steaming cup of chamomile tea on my nightstand, my favorite, which I'd mentioned once out loud to myself while cooking. Another day, after a particularly bad freelance rejection, I came home to find a handwritten note on my pillow in that same elegant cursive, "Don't give up. You're closer than you think." It was signed with a single initial, L. I should have been terrified, but I wasn't. I felt watched over, protected. Lillian wasn't haunting the apartment. She was curating it. She was ensuring that her home, the last place she'd ever thought of, remained a sanctuary for her, and now for me. The climax came on the anniversary of her death. I knew the date from the hospital records. October 17th. I spent the day feeling a strange, heavy energy in the air, like the building itself was holding its breath. That evening, I made a simple dinner and ate it at the small table by the window. As I was washing the dishes, I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping from inside the walls. Not the pipes. This was deliberate tap, 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 tap. I followed the sound to the hallway closet. The tapping was coming from behind the back panel. My heart in my throat, I pulled out the broom and pried at the wood. It came away easily, revealing a small hollow space in the brickwork. Inside was a metal lockbox, rusted with age. It wasn't locked. I opened it. Inside was a single item, a set of old-fashioned brass keys on a leather fob. They were cold to the touch, and beneath them a final note in Lillian's hand. "For when you're ready to leave, don't forget to water the plants." There were no plants in the apartment. I sat on the floor of the closet for a long time, the keys in my hand. I understood then. The rent payments weren't a mistake. They were a tether. As long as the rent was paid, Lillian's spirit could remain tending to her home. The trust fund wasn't just paying for the apartment. It was paying for her afterlife. And the keys, they were for me. A way out. A way to break the cycle. But I didn't want to leave. This apartment, with its silent caretaker, had become the most peaceful place I'd ever known. My work had improved. My anxiety had lessened. I slept deeply every night. Lillian's presence wasn't a burden. It was a blessing. So I put the keys back in the lockbox, slid it into the wall, and replaced the panel. The next morning, I went to the lobby and opened my mailbox. Alongside my own mail was the usual envelope for 3A. On impulse, I took it. I walked to the bank and deposited Lillian's rent check into my own account. It cleared without issue. Now, I pay the rent. From my account to Mr. Arden. but I make sure to write the check in my own handwriting, and every month on the 1st I leave a single white gardenia on the kitchen counter. In the morning, it's always gone. Lillian is still here. I see her sometimes, not as a figure, but as a shift in the light, a cool spot in a warm room, the faint scent of antiseptic and lavender. She's the reason my coffee is always hot when I need it, why my drafts are saved before my laptop crashes, why I never feel truly alone. She's the previous tenant who never stopped paying rent, and I'm the current tenant who has no intention of ever moving out, because some ghosts don't rattle chains or moan in the night. Some ghosts just want to make sure you're taken care of. And in this old mill building on the 3rd floor, in apartment 3B, I am. And that's where this story ends. Let's move on to the next one. Every guest who stayed in room 217 checked out with one more suitcase than they arrived with. I took the job at the Blackwood Hotel out of sheer desperation. It wasn't the kind of place you applied to with ambition in your heart. It was the kind of place you stumbled into after 3 months of rejection emails and dwindling savings, when the prospect of folding towels and changing sheets for minimum wage plus tips felt like salvation. The Blackwood stood on the edge of downtown, a hulking brick relic from the 1920s that had never quite managed to transition from grandeur to boutique charm. Its glory days were sepia-toned photographs in the lobby, women in flapper dresses laughing on the marble staircase, men in sharp suits tipping their hats to bellhops. Now the carpets were threadbare in the high traffic areas, the brass fixtures tarnished to a dull brown, and the air carried a permanent scent of lemon-scented disinfectant trying and failing to mask the underlying odor of mildew and old wood. Mr. Albright, the manager, was a man carved from the same weary material as the hotel itself. Thin, stooped, with eyes that had seen too many checkouts and not enough genuine goodbyes. He showed me the ropes on my first day, how to mix the industrial strength cleaner just right, which rooms had temperamental locks, where the spare linens were kept. He spoke in a low, measured monotone, as if conserving energy was a survival skill. When we reached the 3rd floor, he paused outside room 314, his key card hovering over the reader. "There's one rule," he said, not looking at me. "One absolute rule you do not break. Room 217 is on the 2nd floor at the end of the east wing. You will clean every room on your list except that one. Room 217 cleans itself." I almost laughed. It was such an obvious, tired ghost story, the kind every old hotel uses to spook new staff. "Cleans itself?" I repeated, trying to keep the skepticism from my voice. Albright finally turned his head and looked at me. His eyes weren't playful. They were flat, exhausted, and utterly serious. "The door will be locked when you arrive each morning. When you return at the end of your shift, it will still be locked. But if you look through the peephole, which I do not recommend, you will see that the bed is made, the towels are fresh, the trash can is empty. It happens between the hours of 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. No one goes in. No one comes out. The previous housekeeper, a woman named Lena, who worked here 20 years, insisted on cleaning it herself once. She lasted 3 days before she quit without collecting her final paycheck. She left her own suitcase in room 217. Took a different one with her when she walked out the front door. a larger one. He swiped the keycard. The lock clicked. He pushed the door open to 314. Just stay off the east wing after 10 a.m., stick to your list, and never, ever accept a tip from a guest staying in 217. They'll try to give you one. Always in cash. Always exact change for $100 bill in ones. Don't take it. Don't even look at it. Just say thank you and leave. I nodded, humoring him. Old buildings have quirks. Superstitious managers have rules. I figured 217 was probably just a room reserved for the owner or used for storage, and Albright used the spooky story to keep curious staff away. I didn't believe in ghosts. I believed in leaky pipes, faulty wiring, and the human tendency to invent narratives to explain the mundane. For 2 weeks, I followed the rules. I avoided the east wing after 10. I cleaned my assigned rooms efficiently, learning the rhythms of the place. The Blackwood wasn't empty. Far from it. It had a steady stream of guests, traveling salesmen passing through on their way to nowhere important, elderly couples on fixed incomes who remembered when the hotel was still fashionable, the occasional musician playing at the dive bar down the street. They were quiet mostly, transient, unmemorable. Then came the Tuesday when Mrs. Gable called in sick. Mrs. Gable was the day shift housekeeper, a stout woman in her 60s with iron-gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. She'd been at the Blackwood longer than Albright. She never spoke of room 217. She just never went down that hall. When Albright told me I'd have to cover her route that day, my stomach tightened. I'd have to pass 217. I might even have to clean it if a guest had checked out. "Don't worry," Albright said, his voice devoid of reassurance. "No one's checked out of 217. Guest is still in residence. Just do the other rooms on the east wing. Leave 217 alone. Knock once at 11 to offer turn-down service. If they don't answer, leave the chocolates on the floor outside the door and walk away. Don't wait. Don't listen." I spent the morning cleaning rooms on the west wing, my anxiety building with each passing hour. At 10:45, I stood at the entrance to the east wing, my cart laden with fresh towels and miniature shampoo bottles. The hallway here was different, narrower. The carpet pattern was the same, but it seemed to absorb sound more completely. The air was cooler. I pushed my cart forward, the squeaky wheels suddenly silent, as if the hallway itself was swallowing noise. I cleaned 212, 214, 216. Each room felt normal enough, though a subtle unease settled over me the closer I got to the end of the hall. At 216, as I was wiping down the bathroom sink, I heard it. A soft, rhythmic thumping from the other side of the shared wall. Thump, pause. Thump, pause. Like something heavy being gently set down on the floor, over and over. I pressed my ear against the wall. The sound stopped immediately. I waited a full minute. Nothing. I finished the room quickly and backed out into the hall. Room 217 loomed at the end. The door was identical to all the others, dark wood, brass number plate, electronic lock, but it felt different. The air around it seemed denser, charged with a stillness that wasn't peaceful but watchful. I glanced at my watch. 10:58. I had 2 minutes before I was supposed to knock. I busied myself restocking my cart, my hands trembling slightly. At 11 a.m. exactly, I walked to the door. My knuckles rapped against the wood. 3 sharp professional taps. Housekeeping. Turn down service? Silence. Not ordinary silence of an empty room or a sleeping guest. This was an active silence, a presence holding its breath. I waited the required 10 seconds. Nothing. I bent down, placed the 2 foil-wrapped chocolates on the carpet directly in front of the door, and stood up. As I turned to leave, my eyes caught something at the base of the door. Not a shadow, a seam of darkness that shouldn't have been there. The door wasn't fully closed, just a hair's breadth, less than a millimeter, but enough that the light from the hallway didn't bleed underneath it evenly. One side was perfectly dark. The other had the faintest sliver of illumination. My heart hammered against my ribs. Albright's warning echoed in my mind. Don't listen. I should have walked away. But I was young, and curiosity has always been my fatal flaw. I leaned closer, my ear inches from the gap. At first, nothing. Then a sound so faint I thought I imagined it. The soft rustle of fabric, not the crisp sound of bedsheets being changed. This was heavier. Wool, maybe, or thick canvas. And beneath it, a whisper so low it was almost subaudible, a sibilant hiss that formed no words but carried an unmistakable tone of anticipation. I jerked back as if burned. I didn't run. I forced myself to walk at a normal pace back to my cart, my legs weak. I finished the rest of the east wing in a daze, jumping at every creak of the old building. When I returned to the lobby at 1 p.m. to take my lunch break, Albright was waiting for me behind the front desk, his arms crossed. "You knocked on 217, he stated. It wasn't a question. I nodded, unable to speak. "Did you hear anything?" I hesitated, then nodded again. His face didn't change, but his shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly. "What did you hear?" "The door wasn't quite closed," I whispered. "I heard rustling, like fabric, and whispering." Albright closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, they held a pity I hadn't seen before. "You shouldn't have listened, but you're still here. That's something. Just be careful tonight. Your shift ends at 10. Leave immediately. Don't linger in the lobby. Don't take the elevator alone after 9. I spent the afternoon cleaning the 4th floor, my mind churning. During my break, I did something I should have done weeks ago. I went to the front desk when Albright was in his office and accessed the hotel's internal guest ledger on the old terminal. It was against policy, but fear overrides policy. I typed in 217. The record was sparse. Guest name, Alistair Finch. Check-in date, March 14th, 1987. Expected stay, 1 night. Current. Status, in residence. My blood ran cold. March 14th, 1987, 39 years ago. I scrolled down, my fingers numb. There were no checkout dates, no notes about extending the stay, just a single line at the bottom of the digital record, added manually in 2003 according to the timestamp. Guest prefers extended stay. Billing handled internally. Do not disturb. I logged out quickly, my pulse roaring in my ears. A guest who had been in residence for nearly 4 decades. It was impossible. A clerical error, surely, a placeholder record for a room kept permanently reserved. But Albright's warning, Mrs. Gable's departure, the self-cleaning room, it all clicked into a horrifying pattern. Room 217 wasn't just haunted, it was occupied. Permanently. That evening, as dusk settled over the city, I found myself drawn back to the east wing during my final rounds. I told myself I was just checking that all the other rooms were properly secured for the night. But I knew the truth. I needed to see, just once. I needed to understand what was happening in that room. I waited until 9:45, when the night auditor had stepped into the back office for his coffee break. The lobby was empty. I took the service stairs to the second floor, my footsteps echoing in the concrete well. The east wing was darker now, the single wall sconce halfway down flickering intermittently. I moved silently, my cart left behind. I stopped 20 feet from room 217 and simply watched the door. For 10 minutes, nothing. Then, at 9:57 p.m., I heard it, a soft click from within the room, the electronic lock disengaging. The door swung inward slowly, silently, opening about 6 inches. No one stood there. No hand was visible. The gap revealed only darkness beyond the threshold. I held my breath, pressing myself against the wall across the hall, hidden in shadow. From the darkness within the room, something emerged. Not a person. A suitcase? An old-fashioned leather suitcase, worn at the corners, brass fittings tarnished green with age. It slid smoothly across the threshold, stopping just outside the door on the hallway carpet. It sat there for a full minute, perfectly still. Then, from inside the room, a hand appeared in the doorway. Pale, slender, the fingers long and delicate. It wasn't a threatening hand. It was almost gentle. The fingers curled around the suitcase's handle, gave it a soft tug back across the threshold, and disappeared. The door began to swing shut. But it didn't close all the way. It stopped at that same hair's breadth gap I'd noticed that morning, and through that sliver of darkness I saw it, just for a second. A figure standing in the center of the room, back to the door, tall, thin, wearing what looked like a suit from another era, and beside it, on the neatly made bed, sat 2 suitcases. One was the old leather one I'd just seen. The other was newer, a black nylon roller bag I recognized instantly. It was mine. I'd unpacked it that morning, in my studio apartment across town. I knew the scuff on the corner, the broken zipper pull on the front pocket. There was no mistaking it. The figure didn't turn. It simply stood there, motionless, as if aware of my presence but indifferent to it. Then, slowly, it raised one hand, not toward me, but toward the space beside it on the bed. An invitation, an offer. I ran. I didn't look back. I took the stairs 2 at a time, burst into the lobby, and didn't stop until I was 3 blocks away, leaning against a brick wall, gasping for air. I didn't go back to the Blackwood that night. I called in sick the next day, and the day after that. I told myself I was quitting. I would find another job, any job, but rent was due, and my savings were gone. And after 4 days of panic and sleepless nights, a strange thing happened. The memory began to soften at the edges. The image of my own suitcase on that bed became less a horror and more a curiosity. Had I really seen it? Or had exhaustion and suggestion created a waking nightmare? Hotels have identical luggage. It must have been a coincidence, a trick of the light. I went back to work on Monday. Albright said nothing about my absence. He just handed me my key card and my room list. I avoided the East Wing all morning, but during my lunch break, sitting alone in the staff break room, I found myself thinking about it. Not with fear anymore, but with a gnawing, insistent curiosity. What was in that room? What did it want? And why my suitcase? The question looped in my mind until it lost its terror and became a puzzle, a challenge. That afternoon, a deliveryman arrived with a package for room 217, a small flat cardboard box, no return address. Albright was dealing with an irate guest at the front desk. The delivery man, impatient, thrust the package at me. "You work here? Take it to 217. Sign here." I should have refused. I should have called for Albright. But the puzzle had me in its grip. I signed the digital pad with a trembling finger and took the package. It was light, almost weightless. I stood there in the lobby, the box in my hands, and made a decision that would unravel the rest of my life. I would deliver it. I would see the guest. I would look this thing in the face and prove to myself it was just a man, just a reclusive eccentric who had lived in a hotel room for decades. I would break the spell with simple, mundane reality. I took the elevator to the second floor. My palms were slick with sweat. The hallway to the east wing had never felt longer. I stopped outside 217, the package held tightly against my chest. I raised my hand to knock, but before my knuckles could touch the wood, the lock clicked, the door swung inward 6 inches, the same as last time. An invitation. My breath caught. I could still turn back. I could drop the package and run. But I didn't. I pushed the door open the rest of the way and stepped inside. The room was immaculate, not just clean, perfect. The bed was made with hospital corners so tight you could bounce a coin off the duvet. The desk was bare except for a single unlit candle in a brass holder. The air was cool and carried a faint scent of sandalwood and old paper. And there, standing by the window overlooking the alley, was the figure I'd seen through the crack in the door. He turned as I entered. He was tall and gaunt, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that might have been fashionable in the 1940s. His face was pale, almost translucent, with deep-set eyes the color of faded denim. He wasn't monstrous. He wasn't decaying. He looked tired, profoundly, eternally tired and sad. "You shouldn't be here while awake," he said. His voice was soft, cultured, with an accent I couldn't place. "The threshold is fragile. Consciousness weighs too heavily on it." I held out the package, my arm trembling. "Delivery?" A faint smile touched his lips. Not a happy smile, a resigned one. "Ah, yes, the monthly reminder." He took the box from my hands without touching my fingers. He didn't open it. He simply placed it on the desk beside the candle. "You saw your suitcase," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, unable to speak. "It's not a threat," he said, turning back to the window. "It's an offer, a replacement. Everyone who stays here carries baggage. Not the kind that fits in luggage. The other kind, regrets, guilt, memories that have calcified into weights around the soul. Room 217 absorbs them. It takes the heaviest piece of you and gives you back an empty vessel. A fresh start. The new suitcase is always lighter than the one you arrived with. Isn't that what everyone wants? To be unburdened? I thought of my own baggage, the failed relationship that still woke me at 3 a.m., the career path abandoned in shame, the constant low-grade anxiety that had been my companion since adolescence. The weight of it all pressed down on me in that moment, so tangible I could barely stand upright. "What's in my suitcase?" I whispered. He turned and looked at me, his faded eyes holding mine. Nothing and everything. It contains the shape of what you left behind. The ghost of your burden. It's not dangerous. It's just empty, waiting to be filled again. Eventually, everyone fills it again. That's why they check out. They can't bear the lightness for long. They miss the weight. It's familiar. It's theirs. He gestured to the 2 suitcases on the bed. The old leather one, my black nylon bag. The first guest stayed for 73 years. He arrived with a single valise containing his entire life after his family perished in a fire. He left with 12 steamer trunks, each heavier than the last. He couldn't stop collecting weight. The second guest stayed 3 nights. She arrived with 2 suitcases full of her husband's debts and infidelities. She left with 1 small clutch purse. She never looked back. I have been here since 1943. I arrived with 1 suitcase. I have been waiting for it to feel light enough to leave behind. It never does. The room only takes what you're willing to surrender, and I cannot surrender the last piece. "What's the last piece?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "My name," he said softly. "Without it, who would I be? The room cannot take what I will not release, so I remain, and the suitcases accumulate." He gestured around the room. Only then did I notice them, stacked neatly in the corners under the bed, lining the closet that stood slightly ajar. Dozens of suitcases, hundreds, different eras, different styles, all impeccably maintained. A silent museum of surrendered sorrows. "You can leave now," he said, his gaze returning to the window. "Before the threshold solidifies with your presence, go while you still can." But I didn't move. The weight on my own shoulders felt suddenly unbearable. The thought of walking back into my life, carrying all of it, the shame, the fear, the endless cycle of anxiety, made my chest constrict. What would it feel like to be free of it, just for a night, just to see what lightness felt like? I think I'd like to stay," I heard myself say. The man by the window went very still. He didn't turn. "You don't mean that." "I do," I insisted, the words gaining strength. "Just one night, to see what it's like, to see if I could let go." Slowly he turned. His expression had changed. The sadness was still there, but beneath it was something else. Pity, yes, but also a flicker of hunger, a longing so deep it was almost physical. "One night," he repeated. "You understand the terms? You will sleep in this bed. When you wake, there will be 1 more suitcase than when you arrived. You may take it with you, or you may leave it here. The choice is always yours." "I understand." He nodded once, a sharp, final motion. He walked to the door and opened it. "I will take the hallway. You may have the room. Sleep well." He stepped out, pulling the door shut behind him. I heard the lock engage. I was alone. The room was silent. Too silent. No hum of traffic from the street, no groan of pipes, no whisper of wind. Just a profound, velvety quiet that seemed to press against my eardrums. I sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress was firm, the linens cool against my skin. I lay back, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. I expected fear. I expected to lie awake all night. But exhaustion claimed me almost immediately, a deep, unnatural drowsiness that pulled me under like a riptide. I dreamed of unpacking, not in this room, but in my childhood home. I was emptying a suitcase onto my old bed, pulling out objects that represented every failure, every regret, every moment of shame I had ever experienced. A crumpled rejection letter from my dream college, a photograph of my ex-partner with someone new, a hospital bracelet from the night my mother died, a report card with a failing grade circled in red. Each item heavier than the last. I placed them carefully on the bedspread. My hands trembling with the effort, and with each object I removed, I felt lighter, airier. By the time the suitcase was empty, I was floating above the bed, weightless, free. I looked down at my body lying there, peaceful for the first time in memory, and I saw the suitcase beside it, not empty, but full again, packed neatly with all the things I had just released. But they were different now, diminished, shadows of their former selves. I woke with the first gray light of dawn filtering through the window. I was still in room 217. I was lying on top of the covers, exactly as I had fallen asleep. And on the floor beside the bed, where there had been only 2 suitcases the night before, now sat 3. My black nylon roller bag, the old leather suitcase, and between them a third, smaller, a vintage leather overnight case in deep burgundy, the kind my grandmother might have used for weekend trips. It looked expensive, well cared for, and utterly alien to me. I sat up slowly, my body feeling strange, light, yes, but not in a pleasant way. It was a hollow lightness, as if parts of me had been carved away during the night, leaving cavities where substance used to be. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and knelt before the burgundy suitcase. My hand shook as I unclasped the brass latches. The lid lifted silently. Inside, nestled in cream-colored satin, lay objects. Not my objects. A child's hair ribbon, faded blue. A tarnished silver locket containing a miniature photograph of a woman I didn't recognize. A dried sprig of lavender tied with thread. A letter written in elegant cursive on yellowed paper, the ink faded to brown. A small, smooth river stone. Each item radiated a profound sense of loss. Not my loss, someone else's. A grief I had never felt, yet somehow now carried within me. I snapped the suitcase shut, my breath coming in short gasps. This wasn't freedom, this was theft. The room hadn't taken my burdens, it had replaced them with another's. I had surrendered my own pain only to inherit a stranger's sorrow. I stumbled to the door and yanked it open. The hallway was empty. I grabbed my original suitcase and the new burgundy case and fled the room, not looking back. At the front desk, Albright was waiting. He took one look at my face, at the 2 suitcases in my hands, and his expression hardened into something like grief. "You stayed," he said quietly. I could only nod, tears streaming down my face. He reached under the counter and placed a small envelope on the desk. "Your final paycheck, plus a bonus, for inconvenience." He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Don't come back, and whatever you do, don't open that second suitcase again. Don't look at what's inside. Just take it home, put it in a closet, leave it there. The weight will fade with time. It always does." I took the envelope and walked out of the Blackwood Hotel for the last time. I didn't look back. I went home to my studio apartment and did exactly as Albright instructed. I placed the burgundy suitcase in the back of my closet, behind winter coats I never wore. I tried to forget it was there. For 3 days, I felt lighter. The anxiety that had plagued me for years was gone. The memories that usually haunted my quiet moments were distant, muffled. I slept deeply. I ate without dread. I almost convinced myself it had been worth it. On the 4th night, I woke at 2:17 a.m. to the sound of soft weeping. It wasn't coming from the apartment next door. It was coming from my closet. A woman's voice, broken with a grief so ancient and absolute it froze the blood in my veins. I lay in bed, paralyzed, listening as the weeping slowly subsided, replaced by a single whispered phrase that seeped through the closet door and wrapped itself around my heart. I never got to say goodbye. I knew then what I had taken, not a burden, a soul, a fragment of someone who had stayed in room 217 long ago and surrendered too much, and the room, in its hunger, had given me their echo to carry. I still have the suitcase. I've moved 3 times since that night, and each time I pack it carefully, placing it in the deepest corner of whatever closet I inhabit. I've never opened it again, but sometimes in the deepest part of the night I hear the faint rustle of fabric from within it, and I know that room 217 isn't haunted by ghosts. It is a ghost itself, a hungry, ancient thing that feeds on sorrow and pays its guests in borrowed grief. And I understand now why every guest checks out with one more suitcase than they arrived with. They aren't carrying their own pain anymore. They're carrying someone else's. And the terrible truth no one speaks aloud is this: the new suitcase is always heavier than the one you left behind, because someone else's sorrow has no context, no history to soften its edges. It is pure, undiluted loss, and it waits patiently in the darkness of your closet for the moment you forget to be afraid and unzip the case just one more time. And this story ends here. The next one begins now. Something tucks the sheets tighter around me. Each night after I fall asleep, I moved to the cottage on Blackwater Road because it was the only place I could afford after the divorce. The realtor called it cozy and quaint, which real estate code for small and isolated. It sat at the end of a gravel lane 3 miles from the nearest neighbor, a single-story structure with weathered cedar shingles and a stone chimney that leaned slightly to the left, as if the whole building were bowing under the weight of decades. The interior was sparse: bare wood floors, whitewashed walls, a wood-burning stove for heat, but it had a certain charm. And at $375 a month, charm was a luxury I could no longer afford to be picky about. The first night, I slept deeply, too deeply. I'd been running on fumes for months. Legal battles, packing boxes, the slow unraveling of a life I'd thought would last forever, and the silence of the countryside was a balm. I fell asleep within minutes of my head, hitting the pillow, and didn't stir until dawn painted the bedroom ceiling in pale gold. When I woke, I felt something unusual. The sheets were tucked tightly around my legs, almost to the point of constriction. I'd gone to bed with the covers loosely draped over me, as I always did. I never tucked myself in. I preferred the freedom to move in my sleep. Yet here I was, my legs bound together by hospital corner precision, the fabric pulled taut across my chest. I dismissed it as sleepwalking. Stress does strange things to the body. I'd read about people driving cars, cooking meals, even having conversations while fully asleep. Tucking oneself in seemed almost mundane by comparison. I freed my legs with a few kicks and went about my day, unpacking boxes and trying to ignore the hollow feeling in my chest that had nothing to do with the empty rooms around me. The second night, it happened again. I made a point of leaving the covers completely loose before bed. Draped haphazardly one corner dangling off the side of the mattress. I even placed a paperback novel on the edge of the comforter as a marker. If I sleepwalked and tucked myself in, the book would fall. When I woke at 6:30 a.m., the book was on the floor, and I was swaddled, not just tucked. The sheets were pulled so tightly around my torso, I had to consciously relax my breathing to inhale fully. My arms were pinned to my sides. It felt less like being tucked in and more like being prepared for burial. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I sat up, my heart thudding, and examined the bed. The tucking was meticulous, perfect, the kind of precision my mother used when making hospital beds during her nursing shifts. A tight fold under the mattress, corners folded at exact 45-degree angles. Not a wrinkle to be found. I'd never learned that technique. I didn't know anyone who had. I spent that day researching the cottage's history at the county records office. The building dated back to 1898. Originally a caretaker's residence for the now-defunct Blackwater Asylum 2 miles up the ridge. The asylum had closed in 1963 after a series of scandals involving patient neglect. The cottage had passed through several owners since, mostly seasonal renters, a few long-term residents. The most recent occupant was a woman named Eleanor Voss, who'd lived there alone for 23 years until her death 3 months before I moved in. Cause of death, natural causes. Age, 89. No next of kin. Her obituary was a single paragraph in the local paper. She'd been a nurse at the county hospital for 40 years. Retired. Quiet. Kept to herself. A nurse. Hospital corners. I tried to shake the connection as coincidence. But that night, I set up my phone on the nightstand, propped against a stack of books, camera facing the bed. I activated night vision mode and set it to record for 8 hours. Then I went to sleep with the covers deliberately messy, my body tense with anticipation. I woke to birdsong and morning light. My phone's battery was dead, a detail I'd forgotten to account for. But the charger was still plugged in. Someone had unplugged the phone sometime during the night. And I was tucked in again, this time tighter than before. The sheet was pulled up to my chin, the edge folded precisely beneath my jawline. I couldn't turn my head without straining against the fabric. Panic flared hot in my chest. I thrashed upward, tearing free of the constraints, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The room was empty. The door was closed. The window was latched shut. No one had entered. No one had left. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room armchair with all the lights on, a kitchen knife resting on the side table within easy reach. At 3:17 a.m., exhaustion finally pulled me under. I woke on the floor an hour later, my neck stiff, my body aching. And though I hadn't been in bed, though I'd fallen asleep in the chair, I found myself wrapped in the afghan that had been draped over the sofa back, tucked tightly around my shoulders and legs with that same impossible precision. That was when I knew it wasn't about the bed. It was about me. Whatever was in this cottage didn't care where I slept. It only cared that I was unconscious, vulnerable, and in that state, it performed its ritual. I called the property manager the next morning, my voice trembling despite my efforts to sound casual. "The previous tenant," I said, "Eleanor Voss, did she have any habits? Anything unusual about how she kept the place?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When he spoke, his voice had lost its professional cheer. Ms. Voss was a private woman, but the neighbors, they said she had a routine. Every night before bed, she'd make her bed with fresh sheets, even if she'd just slept in them. She'd tuck herself in so tightly she could barely move. Said it reminded her of being safe, of being cared for. He cleared his throat. Look, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but she didn't die in her sleep like the obituary said. She was found in her bed, fully dressed, tucked in so tightly the EMTs had to cut the sheets to get her out. The coroner said her arms were pinned to her sides. She'd had a stroke in the night. Couldn't move, couldn't call for help. She suffocated slowly, wrapped in her own sheets. I hung up without saying goodbye. I sat on the edge of my bed for an hour, staring at the floorboards, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. Stress, grief, the mind playing tricks in isolation. But the evidence was physical, tangible. The tightness of the sheets each morning was a fact I could not rationalize away. That evening, I decided to fight back. I stripped the bed completely, mattress bare except for the fitted sheet. No top sheet, no comforter, nothing to tuck. I slept in my clothes, the bedroom door wide open, a lamp burning on the nightstand. I fell asleep around midnight, my body rigid with tension. I woke at 4:03 a.m. to the sensation of pressure on my chest. Not heavy pressure, the kind that comes from sleep paralysis or a bad dream, but a gentle, deliberate weight. Methodical. I tried to open my eyes, but my body wouldn't obey. Sleep paralysis. It had to be. My mind was awake, but my body still trapped in REM sleep. I focused on my breathing, on the sensation of air moving in and out of my lungs. And that's when I felt it. The unmistakable slide of fabric being pulled upward, then tucked with sharp, precise folds beneath my body. Not once, not twice, 3 times. Left side, right side, bottom, hospital corners. The pressure on my chest increased incrementally with each tuck until I could feel my ribs straining against my skin with each shallow breath. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even flutter my eyelids, but I was awake, fully, terrifyingly awake, and something was tucking me in. A presence settled on the edge of the mattress beside my hip, not heavy. A suggestion of weight, like a depression in the mattress from a body that wasn't quite solid. I felt cold air against my ear, and then a whisper so faint it might have been the rustle of fabric. Shh, almost done. Just a little tighter. You'll be safe now. The voice was old, female, frail but certain, and it carried a tenderness that made the horror infinitely worse. This wasn't malice. This was care. This was love twisted into imprisonment. The tucking finished. The pressure on the mattress lifted, the presence withdrew, and slowly, agonizingly, control returned to my limbs. I sat up with a gasp, tearing at the sheets with frantic hands. My chest heaved as I sucked in deep, ragged breaths. The room was empty. The door was still open, the lamp still burned, but the sheets were tucked around me with a tightness that left red marks on my skin where the fabric had bitten into my flesh. I didn't sleep again that night. At dawn, I packed a bag and drove to a motel, 20 miles away. I told myself I was being rational, taking space to think, to decide whether to break my lease, but we both know the truth. I was running, and running never solves anything. It just delays the inevitable. I returned to the cottage 3 days later. The motel had drained my already thin savings, and the truth was I had nowhere else to go. I told myself I'd be smarter this time. I'd sleep with the lights on. I'd leave the bedroom door open. I'd fight the paralysis if it came again. But as I unpacked my bag in the living room, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Tacked to the inside of the hall closet door was a small handwritten note on yellowed paper. The ink was faded, but legible. My dearest Eleanor, remember what I taught you. Tight corners keep the nightmares out. When you tuck someone in properly, you're not trapping them. You're protecting them. The world is cold and sharp, but a bed made with love is a fortress. Never forget that. Mother. Beneath the note was a photograph, curled at the edges. A severe-looking woman in a nurse's uniform from the 1940s stood beside a young girl of about 8. The girl, Eleanor, was smiling tentatively. Her mother's hand rested on her shoulder, fingers pressing into the fabric of her dress with unmistakable force. Possessive, protective, the same hand that had taught her to tuck sheets with military precision. The same hand that had, perhaps, first wrapped her daughter in constriction and called it love. That night, I made a decision. I would not fight it. I would not run. I would meet it. I prepared for bed as usual, but instead of resisting sleep, I welcomed it. I lay down with the covers loose, my body relaxed, my mind focused on a single intention. When it comes, I will stay conscious. I will see it. I drifted off faster than I expected, and as I crossed the threshold into sleep, I felt the familiar shift, the world softening at the edges, my body growing heavy. But this time, I held on to a thread of awareness, a lifeline. I felt the mattress depressed beside me. Cold air washed over my face, and then the tucking began, not frantic or violent, but slow, deliberate, reverent. Each fold of fabric was placed with the care of a ritual. As the sheets tightened around my legs, I forced my eyes open. She was there, an old woman in a faded floral nightgown, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, her hands translucent, shimmering like heat haze, working the sheets with practiced efficiency. Her face was kind, wrinkled with age and what might have been sorrow. She didn't look at me. She focused entirely on her work, her lips moving silently as she tucked and folded. But as she smoothed the final corner beneath my chin, her eyes lifted and met mine. She didn't startle. She didn't vanish. She simply smiled, a sad, gentle smile, and whispered, "You're awake. That's all right. I'm almost finished." "Eleanor," I breathed, my voice barely audible. Her smile widened slightly. "No, dear. Eleanor was my daughter. I'm Clara, her mother." Her hands continued their work, tucking the sheet tighter beneath my chin. She learned from me, but she never understood why. She thought it was about control, about keeping people close, but it was never that. It was about safety. The world takes everything from us, our husbands, our children, our youth. But a properly made bed, that's a promise. A promise that for these few hours nothing can hurt you, not nightmares, not loneliness, not death itself. Her form flickered, growing more transparent. Eleanor died afraid, alone. I couldn't reach her in time to tuck her in that final night, but I can reach you, and you. You need tucking in more than anyone I've felt in this house. Your heart is so heavy, your sleep so restless. Let me keep you safe tonight. Just tonight. Tears streamed down my temples into my hair. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was heartbroken for her, for Eleanor, for myself, for all of us who confuse imprisonment with protection, possession with love. "Thank you," I whispered. Clara's form solidified for a moment, her eyes glistening with something like gratitude. She placed one translucent hand on my forehead, a touch like cool mist, and the last fold was tucked beneath my chin. The constriction was absolute. I couldn't move my arms, couldn't lift my head, but the panic didn't come. Instead, a profound peace settled over me. For the first time since the divorce, since the unraveling, I felt safe, truly, deeply safe. Not because I was trapped, but because for these few hours, someone was watching over me. Someone was ensuring that nothing, not even my own restless mind, could disturb my rest. I slept deeply, dreamlessly, the best sleep of my adult life. I woke at dawn to birdsong and golden light. The sheets were still tightly tucked around me, but this time I didn't fight them. I lay there for a long moment, feeling the gentle pressure of the fabric against my skin, and understood the truth I'd been too afraid to see. Some prisons are built not to keep us in, but to keep the world out. And some ghosts don't haunt houses. They haunt the spaces between heartbeats, waiting for someone broken enough to need their particular brand of comfort. I still live in the cottage on Blackwater Road. The rent is still $375 a month. I've stopped fighting the tucking. Some nights, when the weight of loneliness presses down on my chest like a physical force, I lie down with the covers loose and whisper into the dark, "I'm ready." And within minutes of sleep taking me, I feel the mattress depressed, the cool air, the gentle hands working the sheets into perfect, suffocating corners. I wake each morning bound tight, my body imprinted with the shape of care. And sometimes, on the edge of sleep, I feel a second presence joining Clara, a younger woman with Eleanor's sad eyes, helping her mother tuck the corners just so. 2 generations of women who loved too tightly, who confused safety with suffocation, who now offer the only comfort they ever knew how to give. I could leave. I could find an apartment with locks on the doors and no history in the walls. But where would I go to escape my own restlessness, my own need to be held even when holding feels like binding? The cottage gives me what I cannot give myself, the permission to be still, to be safe, to surrender the exhausting work of staying loose and free when what I truly crave is the weight of something or someone holding me down. Last night, as Clara's hands worked the sheet beneath my chin, I whispered, "You can stop now. I'm not afraid anymore." Her form paused. Then she leaned close, her breath like winter air against my ear. "But I am," she whispered back. "I'm afraid of what waits for me when there's no one left to tuck in. So let me do this, just a little longer, until you learn to tuck yourself in, until you learn that safety isn't something someone else gives you. It's something you build corner by corner around your own fragile heart." The sheets tightened one final time, not with constriction, but with embrace. And as I drifted into sleep, I realized the most terrifying truth of all. I no longer wake up wanting to escape the tucking. Some mornings, when the sheets are looser than usual, I find myself pulling them tighter myself, recreating the pressure, the safety, the ghost of a mother's love wrapped around my body like a promise. And I wonder, as dawn light filters through the window, whether I'm still the tenant in this cottage, or whether I've become part of its architecture. Another presence waiting in the walls for the next broken soul who needs to be tucked in. Another ghost learning, too late, that the most dangerous prisons are the ones we start to love. That brings this story to a close. Let's carry on to the next one. Every night at midnight, the faucets run hot water in the abandoned house next door. I moved into 427 Sycamore Street because it was the only house on the block that wasn't boarded up or overgrown with kudzu. The neighborhood, once a proud middle-class enclave of brick bungalows and manicured lawns, had been slowly dying for 20 years, its residents fleeing after the textile mill closed and the jobs vanished. Now most of the houses stood empty, their windows dark eyes staring blankly at the cracked sidewalks. Mine was an exception, a modest two-bedroom with peeling paint but solid bones, available for $550 a month cash. The landlord, a weary man named Mr. Vance, who lived 3 towns over, didn't ask for a credit check. He just handed me the keys and said, "Don't worry about the house next door. It's been empty for years." The house next door, 429 Sycamore, was a mirror image of mine, only more decayed. Its porch sagged dangerously, its roof shingled with patches of blue tarp, its yard a jungle of waist-high weeds. Every window was either broken or covered with plywood, stamped with the faded logo of a long-defunct security company. It looked exactly like what it was, abandoned, forgotten, a tomb for memories no one wanted to keep. For the first week, I barely noticed it. I was too busy scrubbing decades of grime from my own kitchen cabinets, patching holes in the drywall, trying to convince myself that this crumbling relic could be a home. But on the 8th night, as I lay in bed reading by lamplight, I heard it, a sound of rushing water, not from my own pipes. The old plumbing in my house groaned and clanked, but never with that steady, pressurized hiss. This was different, clearer, closer. It came from next door. I sat up listening. The sound lasted exactly 3 minutes, long enough to fill a bathtub maybe, and then stopped as abruptly as it had started. I checked my phone. 12:03 a.m. I told myself it was a trick of the wind, whistling through broken pipes, or maybe a raccoon knocking over a bucket in the basement. Old houses make noises, especially empty ones. But it happened again the next night and the next. Always at midnight, always for 3 minutes, always hot water. I could hear the subtle shift in pitch as the cold line cleared and the hot took over. A sound any tenant of an old building learns to recognize. By the end of the second week, I was obsessed. I'd sit on my back porch at 11:55 p.m., a thermos of coffee in hand, watching the dark silhouette of 429 Sycamore. At midnight sharp, steam would begin to curl from the bathroom vent on the roof, a thin, ghostly plume visible even in the moonlight. Then the hiss of running water would start, echoing faintly through the shared wall between our houses. 3 minutes later, silence. The steam would dissipate. The night would return to its usual stillness. I asked Mr. Vance about it during his monthly inspection. He wiped his brow with a handkerchief and wouldn't meet my eyes. City must have left the main on when they condemned it. Probably a leak in the system. Nothing to worry about. But it's always at midnight, I pressed, and it's always hot water. A leak wouldn't follow a schedule. He shrugged, already walking toward his truck. Old pipes do strange things. Just ignore it. I couldn't ignore it. The regularity of it felt intentional, ritualistic, like someone or something was performing a nightly ablution in a house with no electricity, no gas, and no running water service since 2008, according to the utility records I'd surreptitiously pulled at the town hall. One Saturday afternoon, while Mr. Vance was out of town, I decided to investigate. I waited until dusk, then slipped through the overgrown hedge separating our yards. The front door of 429 was padlocked, but the side window, the one overlooking the shared driveway, was loose in its frame. With a firm push, it slid open with a groan of rusted hinges. The interior was a time capsule of neglect. Dust lay thick on every surface. The air smelled of mildew, rodent droppings, and the sweet sour tang of long-dried urine. Furniture remained, covered in stained sheets. A layer of dead leaves carpeted the floor near the back door. I moved cautiously through the living room, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, and headed for the bathroom. The bathroom door was closed. I turned the knob slowly. It opened without resistance. The room was spotless. Not just clean, immaculate. The porcelain sink gleamed. The clawfoot tub was free of rust or grime. The mirror above the sink was clear, reflecting my startled face back at me. And the faucets. They were polished brass, shining as if recently used. On the edge of the tub sat a single bar of soap, ivory-colored, wrapped in paper, unopened. A folded towel rested on the closed toilet lid, pristine white. My blood ran cold. This wasn't possible. The rest of the house was a ruin, but this room was maintained, cared for, ready for use. I checked the faucets. They were off. I turned them both. Nothing. No water pressure. The house truly was disconnected from the municipal lines. So where did the water come from every night at midnight? I searched the rest of the house, but found nothing else out of the ordinary. No hidden tanks, no pumps, no evidence of recent habitation, just decay and dust. I left the way I came, my mind racing. That night, I sat on my porch again, waiting. At midnight, the steam began to rise from the vent. The hiss of water started, but this time I heard something else beneath it, a soft, rhythmic splashing, like someone moving in a full tub, a bath. I didn't sleep that night. The next day I went to the local historical society. After hours of digging through microfiche and property records, I found it, a newspaper clipping from October 1987. Local woman found dead in bathtub. The victim, Margaret Ellis, age 68. She'd lived alone at 429 Sycamore for 42 years. The article stated she'd died of natural causes, heart failure. But neighbors reported she'd been despondent since her husband's death 5 years earlier. She'd taken a bath every night at midnight without fail, a ritual she'd begun on their wedding night in 1945. She said it kept his memory alive. One neighbor quoted, said the steam carried his voice to her. I returned home with a new understanding. Margaret hadn't just died in that tub. She'd bound herself to it, to the ritual, to the moment when the water ran hot and the world outside ceased to exist. And for 3 minutes, she could pretend he was still there, whispering to her through the steam. But why now? Why, after 38 years of silence, had the faucets started running again? The answer came to me as I stood at my kitchen sink washing dishes that evening. I'd been here for 3 weeks. 3 weeks since I'd moved into the house next door, since I'd become a witness. That night, I didn't watch from my porch. I went inside 429 Sycamore before midnight. I sat on the edge of the immaculate tub, my back against the cool porcelain, and waited. At 12 a.m. sharp, the faucets turned on by themselves, not with a jerk, but smoothly, gracefully, as if guided by invisible hands. Hot water gushed from the spout, filling the tub with a sound like distant rain. Steam rose in thick, fragrant clouds, eucalyptus and lavender, the scent of a woman who remembered how to care for herself. And then I saw her. Not a figure, not a specter, just a presence in the steam. A suggestion of form. Shoulders rising from the water, arms resting along the tub's edge, the curve of a head tilted back in relaxation. Her face was indistinct, blurred by the vapor, but her posture radiated profound peace. She wasn't looking at me. She was lost in her ritual, in her memory, in the 3 minutes of eternity she'd carved out for herself in the space between life and whatever comes after. I stayed until the water shut off at 12:03 a.m. The steam cleared, the tub was empty, but the air still held the scent of lavender. I returned every night after that. I never spoke, never intruded. I simply bore witness to her private communion with the past. And slowly, she began to acknowledge me. One night, a fresh towel appeared beside me. Another night, the soap was unwrapped. Once, as I sat in the corner chair, I felt a cool, damp hand briefly cover mine, a gesture of gratitude, of connection. Margaret Ellis hadn't been haunting the house. She'd been waiting for someone to move in next door, someone whose presence would re-anchor the ritual to the living world. Because ghosts can't perform rituals in total isolation. They need a witness to give their actions meaning, to validate their existence. My arrival hadn't disturbed her peace. It had completed it. Now, every night at midnight, I walk next door. I sit quietly in the bathroom as the faucets run, as the steam rises, as Margaret takes her eternal bath. I don't try to speak to her. I don't ask questions. I just sit in the warm, fragrant dark and honor her ritual. And in return, she gives me something I didn't know I needed, proof that love doesn't end with death. That some bonds are so strong they can bend time itself, creating pockets of eternity where the past and present touch, if only for 3 minutes each night. The abandoned house next door isn't abandoned anymore. It's a sanctuary, a chapel of steam and memory, and I am its humble acolyte, keeper of the midnight vigil, guardian of a love story that refuses to be forgotten. The faucets run hot water every night at midnight, not because the pipes are haunted, but because the heart remembers its rhythms long after the body has turned to dust. And as long as I'm here to witness it, Margaret Ellis will never be alone in her bath again. And this story ends here. The next one begins now. The ghost in the hallway mirror only appears when you're not looking directly at it. I moved into the apartment on Willow Street because it was cheap. And when you're scraping by on freelance graphic design gigs that pay less than your grocery bill, cheap is the only adjective that matters. The building was a converted Victorian, its grand bones still visible beneath decades of shoddy renovations and landlord neglect. My unit was on the second floor, a long, narrow space with high ceilings, hardwood floors worn to a dull gray, and a single bathroom at the far end of a hallway that seemed to stretch on forever. The previous tenant had left in a hurry. I could tell by the faint outlines on the walls where posters had been ripped down and the lingering scent of stale cigarette smoke that no amount of Febreze could fully erase. The first thing I noticed was the mirror. It hung on the wall opposite the bathroom door, a tall, ornate thing with a tarnished silver frame that looked like it belonged in a museum of forgotten things. It was positioned perfectly to catch your reflection as you walked from the living area to the bathroom, a fact that felt less like an accident and more like a deliberate, unsettling design choice. The landlord, a man named Mr. Vance, with a voice like gravel and eyes that never quite met mine, had mentioned it offhandedly during the tour. "Old family heirloom," he'd said, waving a dismissive hand. "Been there since the place was built. Don't worry about it." For the first few days, I didn't. I was too busy unpacking boxes, assembling my rickety IKEA furniture, and trying to ignore the way the floorboards groaned underfoot like they were complaining about my presence. The mirror was just a mirror. My reflection was tired, my hair a mess, my eyes shadowed from too many late nights staring at a screen. Nothing out of the ordinary. The trouble started on the fourth night. I was walking to the bathroom to brush my teeth before bed. As I passed the mirror, I caught a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision. It was so fast I almost dismissed it as a trick of the light, a dust mote dancing in the beam from the overhead fixture. But something about it made me pause. I stopped in the middle of the hall, turned my head slowly, and looked directly at the mirror. Nothing, just my own face, wide-eyed and wary, staring back at me. I frowned, shook my head, and continued to the bathroom. I brushed my teeth, the rhythmic scrubbing of the brush against my teeth, a familiar grounding sound. When I was done, I turned off the bathroom light and stepped back into the hallway. This time, I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead, not looking at the mirror at all. And that's when I saw it. In the glass just over my left shoulder, a figure stood in the hallway behind me. It was tall and indistinct, its features blurred as if seen through frosted glass. It wasn't wearing what I was wearing. Its shape was draped in something dark and heavy, like a long coat or a shroud. My breath hitched in my throat. I spun around, my heart slamming against my ribs. The hallway was empty, completely, utterly empty. There was no one there. I stood there for a full minute, listening to the silence, my skin prickling with cold sweat. Slowly, cautiously, I turned back to the mirror. I looked directly at it. My own pale, frightened face stared back. No one else was there. I told myself it was a hallucination. Stress, sleep deprivation. My mind playing tricks on me in the strange new environment. I went to bed, but I didn't sleep well. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that blurred figure standing behind me in the glass. The next day, I decided to test it. I walked down the hallway to the kitchen, keeping my eyes locked on the mirror the entire time. My reflection moved with me, perfectly, in sync. Nothing strange, nothing out of place. I returned to the living room, again watching my reflection. Still normal. Then I tried it again. I walked down the hall, but this time I kept my eyes fixed on the far wall just past the mirror. I refused to look at it directly. I could feel its presence, a cold spot on my skin as I passed by. And in the glass I saw it again. The figure was there, standing just behind my reflection. It hadn't moved closer. It was just there, waiting. I forced myself not to react, not to turn around. I kept walking, my legs stiff, until I was safely in the kitchen. I leaned against the counter, my hands trembling, and took several deep breaths. The pattern was undeniable. The ghost, because that's what it had to be, only appeared when I wasn't looking directly at the mirror. The moment my gaze fell upon it, it vanished, leaving only my own hollow-eyed reflection. This became my new terrifying reality. The hallway was no longer just a passage, it was a gauntlet. Every trip to the bathroom was a calculated risk. I would steel myself, decide whether to look at the mirror or not, and then move as quickly as possible. If I looked, I was safe from seeing it, but I felt exposed, vulnerable, as if by meeting my own eyes in the glass, I was leaving my back open to whatever stood behind me. If I didn't look, I could see it in my peripheral vision, a constant, silent companion in the glass, its blurred form a promise of something I couldn't quite comprehend. I started researching the building's history online. The search results were sparse, but I found a digitized newspaper archive from 1952. A short article mentioned a fire in a boarding house on Willow Street. One fatality, a young woman named Eleanor Voss, who had been trapped in her room on the second floor. The article noted she was a seamstress and was known for being a quiet, private soul. There was no photo. The address matched my building. My blood ran cold. My apartment was on the second floor. Was my hallway her old room? I began to notice other things. On nights when I was particularly exhausted, the figure in the mirror seemed to gain a little more definition. I could make out the suggestion of long, dark hair framing its blurred face. Its posture was not threatening, but sad, resigned, as if it were just as trapped by this strange rule as I was. It never moved. It never reached for me. It just stood there, a silent witness to my comings and goings, visible only in the corners of my perception. One night, desperate for a solution, I covered the mirror with a sheet. I pinned it up securely so no light could get through. The hallway felt immediately lighter, safer. I slept better that night than I had in weeks. But in the morning, when I went to the bathroom, the sheet was on the floor. The mirror was uncovered, its surface gleaming innocently in the morning light. I checked the pins. They were still in place, stuck firmly into the wall. The sheet hadn't fallen. It had been removed. Panic began to set in. I couldn't live like this, a prisoner in my own home, afraid to walk down a hallway. I called Mr. Vance, my voice tight with a fear I tried to mask as annoyance. "The mirror in the hall," I said. "It's given me a headache. Can you please take it down?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When he spoke, his gravelly voice was lower, quieter. "That mirror stays. It's part of the lease. You knew that when you signed." He hung up without another word. His reaction confirmed my worst fears. He knew. He'd always known. The mirror wasn't just an heirloom. It was a fixture, a prison for whatever was inside it. And I was now its reluctant jailer. The breaking point came a week later. I was working late on my laptop in the living room, the only light coming from the screen. I needed a glass of water. The kitchen was down the hall past the mirror. I was too tired to care anymore. I was sick of the fear, sick of the game. I stood up, walked to the hallway, and stopped in front of the mirror. I looked at it, not at my reflection, but at the glass itself, at the space where the figure always appeared. "Show yourself," I whispered, my voice raw. "If you're there, show yourself to my face." I held my gaze steady, refusing to blink. For a long, agonizing minute, nothing happened. Just my own face, pale and defiant, staring back. I was about to turn away to concede that it was all in my head after all, when I saw it. Not in the periphery, not behind my reflection. In the glass, my own eyes, the eyes of my reflection, flickered. They lost their focus, their life, and for a single heart-stopping second, they were not my eyes at all. They were the eyes of a stranger, filled with a bottomless sorrow and a quiet, ancient anger. Then, just as quickly, they were mine again. I stumbled back, a cry escaping my lips. I ran to the kitchen, filled a glass with water, and drank it down in 3 shaky gulps. I didn't look at the mirror again that night, but I didn't need to. I knew what I'd seen. The ghost wasn't just in the mirror. It was of the mirror. It was bound to the glass, and its only power was to exist in the space between direct sight and peripheral awareness. To be seen, but never truly looked at. To be a secret the world could only glimpse out of the corner of its eye. I live with it now. I've learned to navigate the hallway with a kind of grim acceptance. I don't cover the mirror anymore. I don't try to remove it. I simply acknowledge its presence. Sometimes, when I'm feeling brave, I'll walk down the hall without looking at it, just to see its blurred form in the glass, a silent companion in my solitude. Other times, I meet my own eyes in the reflection, a small act of defiance against the thing that shares my home. But the most terrifying thought of all, the one that keeps me awake on the darkest nights, is this. What if the ghost isn't the one trapped in the mirror? What if, by moving into this apartment, by becoming its audience, I am the one who has been caught? What if the real horror isn't that it appears when I'm not looking, but that one day I'll look directly at it and it will finally be able to look back? And in that moment of direct, unbroken eye contact, the boundary between us will dissolve, and I will become the reflection, and it will be the one who walks free. I haven't tested that theory. I don't think I ever will. Some doors once opened can never be closed, and some mirrors should never be looked into for too long. And with that, this story comes to an end. Let's move on to the next one. My new home has a closet that wasn't on the floor plan and won't stay locked. I found the house on a Tuesday in late September, when the real estate market had cooled enough that desperation began to outweigh greed. The listing was sparse, just 3 photographs and a price that made my stomach clench with disbelief. $89,000 for a 3-bedroom Victorian on a quiet street lined with mature oaks. In any other city, in any other year, it would have been impossible. But this was Millwood, a town slowly bleeding population as the factories closed and young people fled for brighter lights. The house had been on the market for 14 months. The seller, an estate executor handling the affairs of a reclusive elderly woman named Beatrice Holloway, was motivated to close quickly. I made an offer that same afternoon. It was accepted before dinner. The inspection was cursory. The inspector, a tired man named Ray who smelled of coffee and resignation, spent 90 minutes walking through the rooms with a clipboard, noting minor issues. A leaky faucet in the master bath, cracked grout in the kitchen tile, peeling paint on the porch columns. He pronounced the structure sound, the foundation stable, the electrical updated sometime in the 1990s. When I asked about the floor plan discrepancy, the listing showed 1,850 square feet, but the rooms felt more spacious. He shrugged. Old houses settle. Walls shift. Square footage estimates from that era were never precise. He didn't open every closet. He didn't measure every inch. He signed his report and took my check and left me standing in the empty living room, the keys cold and heavy in my palm. I moved in on the 1st of October. The house welcomed me with a gentle groan of floorboards and the scent of lemon polish layered over decades of wood smoke and quiet living. It was a good house, solid, peaceful. For 3 days, I unpacked boxes, arranged furniture, hung curtains over windows that looked out onto a neglected but promising garden. I learned the rhythms of the place, the way the morning sun hit the kitchen floor at 7:14 a.m., the soft sigh the radiators made when the heat kicked on at dusk, the particular creak of the third stair from the top that announced my ascent to the second floor. It was on the 4th morning that I found the closet. I was carrying a basket of laundry upstairs, sorting clothes in my head, shirts to the hall closet, sweaters to the bedroom armoire, towels to the linen cupboard beside the bathroom. I'd opened that cupboard twice already, retrieving extra sheets on my first night and a spare blanket the next morning. Both times, I'd noted its narrow dimensions, just deep enough for a stack of folded linens with a single shelf above. But that morning, as I pushed the louvered door open, something was different. The space beyond wasn't narrow. It was deep. Deeper than the exterior wall of the house should have allowed, at least 6 feet deep, with a low-hanging bulb casting a weak yellow glow over bare wooden shelves and a floor of unfinished planks. I stopped cold, the laundry basket digging into my hip. I stepped back and examined the hallway. The bathroom door was where it should be. The bedroom door across the hall aligned perfectly, but this closet, this deep, inexplicable space, occupied territory that, according to the floor plan taped to my refrigerator, belonged to the neighboring property. I'd studied that plan obsessively before closing. There was no closet here, only wall, shared wall with the house next door, which stood vacant and for sale with a faded sign out front. I set the laundry basket down and stepped inside the closet. The air was cooler than the hallway, carrying a faint scent of cedar and something else, damp earth, like a root cellar. The shelves were empty except for a single yellowed envelope resting on the middle shelf. No name, no address, just a date written in faded ink. October 12th, 1958. I picked it up. It was empty. I turned it over in my hands, my pulse quickening. When I looked up, the door was closed. I hadn't closed it, I was certain. I'd stepped inside facing the doorway, the hall light streaming over my shoulder. The door had been open. Now it was shut, not latched, just closed, the louvers perfectly aligned. I pushed it open and stepped back into the hall. The laundry basket sat where I'd left it. The house was silent. I retrieved my phone from my pocket and called the real estate agent. "Sarah, it's Elias, the new owner of 427 Sycamore. There's a closet upstairs that wasn't on the floor plan, a deep one in the hallway outside the bathroom." Silence on the other end, then carefully, "The hall closet for linens?" "No, not the linen cupboard, a different one, deeper. It's right where the floor plan shows only wall." Another pause, longer this time. "Elias, there is no other closet on that floor, just the one beside the bathroom, the small one. I'm standing in front of it right now. I said, my voice tight. "It's 6 feet deep. There's an empty envelope inside dated 1958. Sarah's sigh was weary, practiced. "Look, old houses have quirks. Previous owners build things. Maybe Mrs. Holloway added storage. The floor plan from the assessor's office is from 1972. Things change. But this closet occupies space that shouldn't exist. It pushes into the neighbor's property line." "Call the city surveyor if it bothers you," she said, her tone closing the conversation. "But honestly, count your blessings. Extra storage in a house that size is a gift." She hung up. I stood in the hallway for 10 minutes, staring at the closed closet door. Then I went downstairs, retrieved a tape measure from my toolbox, and returned. I measured the exterior wall from the outside, 42 feet, 6 inches. I measured the interior hallway wall, 38 feet. The math was impossible. 4 feet, 6 inches of interior space existed where none should. I measured again and again. The numbers never changed. That evening after dinner, I decided to secure the closet, not because I was afraid, though a cold knot had settled in my stomach, but because the impossibility of it unnerved me. I needed to assert control over my own home. I went to the hardware store and bought a heavy-duty padlock and a hasp kit. Back home, I drilled the hasp into the door frame and the door itself, my hand steady, despite the tremor in my chest. I slid the padlock through the hasp and clicked it shut. The metallic snap was satisfyingly final. I tested it, solid, immovable. I went to bed feeling like I'd won a small victory against the house's mysteries. I woke at 3:17 a.m. to the sound of my own name. Not a shout, not a whisper, just my name, Elias, spoken softly, clearly, from the hallway outside my bedroom door. I sat bolt upright, my heart hammering. The house was silent again. I waited, straining my ears. Nothing. After 5 minutes of rigid stillness, I convinced myself it had been a dream, a fragment of sleep thought bleeding into wakefulness. I lay back down. At 4:02 a.m., I heard it again. This time, followed by the soft, rhythmic creak of a door swinging open and closed. Open, closed, open, closed, like something testing its range of motion. I didn't hesitate this time. I threw back the covers, grabbed the baseball bat I kept beside the bed, and crept into the hallway. The closet door was open, wide open. The padlock hung from the hasp, unlocked, the shackle dangling free. I picked it up. It was cold. The mechanism was intact. No signs of forced entry, no scratches on the metal. It had simply unlocked itself. I relocked it. This time I wrapped a length of heavy chain around the door handle and anchored it to the brass radiator pipe in the hall, securing it with a second padlock. Triple redundancy. No rational mechanism could defeat this. I returned to bed and didn't sleep again that night. Morning light revealed both padlocks unlocked, the chain neatly coiled on the floor beside the open closet door. I spent the day researching Beatrice Holloway. The local library's microfiche reader whirred as I scrolled through decades of newspaper archives. Beatrice had lived in the house alone since 1951, when her husband Arthur disappeared, not died, disappeared. Vanished on his way home from work one October evening, his car found abandoned on the old Millwood Bridge with the driver's door open and his lunchbox still on the passenger seat. No body was ever recovered. Beatrice never remarried, never left the house. She worked as a seamstress, took in mendage from neighbors. and was described in a 1978 human interest piece as a quiet woman who keeps to herself and tends her garden with meticulous care. She died in her sleep at age 94. The house had stood empty for 18 months before the estate sale. I found one peculiar detail buried in a police report from 1963. A neighbor had called authorities, complaining that Beatrice was digging in her walls at night. Officers responded, found nothing amiss, and chalked it up to the neighbor's paranoia. The report noted Beatrice's calm explanation, just making room for what needs to be kept safe. That evening, I didn't try to lock the closet. Instead, I sat in a chair in the hallway, a cup of coffee cooling in my hands, and watched it. The house settled around me. The usual pops and groans of cooling pipes and contracting wood. At 9:47 p.m., the closet door began to move, not swinging open dramatically, but inching outward with a soft, persistent pressure from within. It opened 6 inches, paused, then closed again. Opened 8 inches, closed, each cycle gaining a fraction more distance. After 20 minutes, it stood fully open, the darkness within absolute despite the hallway light. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I waited. At 10:13 p.m., something emerged. Not a hand, not a face. A sound. A soft, wet, dragging noise like a heavy sack being pulled slowly across rough wood. It came from deep within the closet, from that impossible space that shouldn't exist. The sound lasted 12 seconds, then silence. Then a single, clear whisper that seemed to come from right beside my ear, though the hallway was empty. "Let me out." I fled to my bedroom and locked the door. I didn't sleep. I sat with my back against the doorframe, the baseball bat across my knees, listening to the house breathe around me. At dawn, I crept into the hall. The closet door was closed. The chain and padlocks lay undisturbed on the floor where I'd left them the night before. I called a contractor the next morning, a man named Mike, with calloused hands and no patience for ghost stories. I showed him the closet. He measured the exterior and interior walls with a laser tool, his brow furrowing. "That's not possible," he muttered, recalibrating the device 3 times. He examined the doorframe, ran his hands along the wall seams. "There's no seam here, no indication this was added later. This closet is original to the structure, but the math—" He shook his head. "I can't explain it." "Can you seal it?" I asked. "Board it up, plaster over it, make it disappear." Mike looked uncomfortable. "I could, but I don't like it. There's something wrong with this space. The air, it's wrong." He packed his tools without meeting my eyes. "I'm sorry, I can't take this job." I spent the next week in a state of escalating dread. The closet remained unlocked each morning, no matter how securely I fastened it the night before. I began finding things inside it that I hadn't placed there. A child's hair ribbon, faded blue, a tarnished silver thimble, a single mud-caked work boot, size 10, caked with dried clay that smelled faintly of riverbed silt. Each item appeared overnight, resting neatly on the middle shelf as if placed there with care. I threw them away. They reappeared the next morning. The whispers grew more frequent, not just at night anymore. I'd be washing dishes and hear my name from the hallway. I'd be reading in bed and hear the soft, dragging sound from behind the closet door, always followed by the same plea, "Let me out." I stopped sleeping in the bedroom nearest the closet. I moved my mattress to the living room, barricading myself behind furniture each night. It didn't help. The whispers followed me. The dragging sound seeped through floorboards. The house itself seemed to be leaning toward that impossible space, its bones straining toward the secret at its heart. The breaking point came on October 28th, exactly 1 month after I'd moved in. I woke at 2:33 a.m. to the sensation of pressure on my chest. Not sleep paralysis. I was fully awake, my eyes wide open, the street lamp casting long shadows across the living room ceiling. But I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't draw a full breath. And from upstairs, I heard the closet door open, then footsteps, slow, deliberate, descending the stairs. One step, pause. Another step, pause. The sound of wet fabric dragging against wood. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs, stopped. Silence stretched for 30 seconds. Then a voice, not a whisper this time, but clear, resonant, filled with a sorrow so profound it made my eyes burn with tears I couldn't shed. Beatrice promised she would let me out. She promised after 1 year, but 1 year became 5. 5 became 20. 20 became forever. I've been in the walls so long I've forgotten the feel of sunlight on my skin. I've forgotten my daughter's face. I just want to go home. The pressure on my chest lifted. I gasped, sucking air into my burning lungs. I scrambled backward across the floor, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The front door stood open, wide open, though I'd locked it securely before bed. Cold night air poured into the room, and on the threshold, silhouetted against the street lamp's glow, stood a figure, tall, gaunt, dressed in clothes from another era, a work shirt, suspenders, trousers darkened with what might have been river mud. He didn't look at me. He simply stood there for a long moment, his head tilted, as if listening to a distant sound only he could hear. Then he stepped forward, not out the door, but through it, his form dissolving into mist as it crossed the threshold. Gone. I didn't sleep that night. At dawn, I drove to the county records office and pulled every document I could find on Arthur Holloway, police reports, missing persons files, coroner's statements, and buried in a box of unindexed materials from a cold case review in 2001, I found it. A single, water-stained page from Beatrice Holloway's private journal, confiscated during a welfare check in 1965, when neighbors reported her talking to the walls. The entry was dated November 3rd, 1958, 3 weeks after Arthur's disappearance. He came back last night, not as himself, something wearing his face. It stood at the foot of the bed and said it was hungry. I knew then what had taken my Arthur. I went to the basement and found the old rituals in Mother's trunk, the ones she warned me never to use, but I had no choice. I drew the circle in the hallway. I spoke the words. When it came again that night, I trapped it, not in the circle, in the space between walls. The thin place where the house breathes, it struggles still, it whispers his name. But it is not him. It will never be him again. I will keep it contained, for the town's safety, for my own, even if I must listen to its lies forever. Even if it begs me to let it out with his voice, I will not. I cannot. Some doors, once closed, must never open again. I sat in the records office for 2 hours, the page trembling in my hands. Beatrice hadn't built a closet. She'd built a prison, a containment chamber in the liminal space between dimensions, sealed behind a door that appeared to be ordinary storage. and whatever she'd trapped there had been, feeding on her grief for 67 years, wearing her husband's voice like a skin, learning her memories, perfecting its imitation until even she might have doubted her own conviction. I returned to the house at dusk. I stood in the hallway staring at the closet door. It was closed. I knew what I had to do. Not to free what was inside. That thing wearing Arthur's face deserved its prison. But to properly seal it, to finish Beatrice's work. She'd been alone, terrified. She'd done what she could with the knowledge she had, but I had something she didn't, certainty, and the will to do what was necessary. I went to the hardware store and bought salt, not table salt, 50 pounds of rock salt, the kind used for icy driveways. I bought sage bundles, iron nails, and a can of black spray paint. I returned to the house as night fell and began my work. First, I painted a thick black line across the threshold of the closet door, a boundary. Then I poured a continuous line of salt along the baseboard surrounding the entire closet, sealing it in a circle of purification. I hammered iron nails into the doorframe at the 4 cardinal points, north, south, east, west, each nail driven deep with 3 sharp strikes. Finally, I lit the sage bundles and walked the perimeter of the closet 7 times, the smoke curling into the cracks between floorboards, into the seams of the walls, into the very fabric of the space. As I worked, the closet door began to rattle, not violently, a desperate, frantic shaking, like something throwing itself against glass from the inside. The dragging sound came again, louder now, accompanied by a wet, choking sob. "Elias, please, it's me, Arthur. Let me out. I'm so cold." I didn't stop. I didn't answer. I completed the 7th circuit and stood before the door, my voice steady despite the terror clawing at my throat. "You are not Arthur Holloway. You never were. You will remain here, not as punishment, but as protection for the world you would harm, for the memory of the man you stole." The rattling ceased instantly. The dragging stopped. An absolute silence fell over the house, a silence so profound it felt like the building itself was holding its breath. Then a single whisper, so faint I almost missed it. "Thank you." I locked the door with a new padlock. I didn't chain it. I didn't barricade it. I simply turned the key and left it locked. I went to bed in my bedroom upstairs for the first time in weeks. I slept deeply, dreamlessly, the best sleep of my life. I still live in the house on Sycamore Street. The rent is still $89,000, a price that now feels less like a bargain and more like a sacred trust. I check the salt line every Sunday. I replace the sage bundles monthly. The padlock remains secure. The closet stays closed. But sometimes, in the deepest part of the night, I hear a different sound from behind that door. Not rattling, not dragging, not begging, just a soft, rhythmic tapping, knuckles against wood, 3 times, a pause, 3 times again, a signal, a greeting. And on those nights, I walk to the hallway, press my ear against the cool wood of the door, and whisper back, "I'm here, you're safe, rest now." Because I understand now what Beatrice learned too late. Some prisons aren't built to contain monsters. They're built to protect what remains of the human inside them. And some ghosts don't need to be freed. They need to be witnessed, to be acknowledged, to be reminded that even in the darkest spaces between walls, they are not entirely alone. The closet wasn't on the floor plan because it was never meant to be part of the living world. It was a wound in the architecture, a scar where reality had been stitched back together after something terrible tried to slip through. And I, the new keeper of this house, have become its guardian, not its prisoner, not its victim, its warden. And sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, I think I feel a hand, cold but gentle, resting briefly on my shoulder as I sleep. Not threatening, not hungry, just grateful for the salt, for the iron, for the witness who finally understood that some doors must stay locked, not to keep something in, but to keep the rest of us safe, and to give the thing inside a chance after all these years to remember what it was before the hunger took hold, before the lie became its only truth, before it forgot that even monsters were once men who loved their daughters and came home from work whistling in the October dusk. I keep the closet locked, but I never forget to listen, because the most terrifying truth I've learned in this house is this: the monster isn't what's trapped behind the door. The monster is the loneliness that would make any of us, human or otherwise, pretend to be someone we're not, just to feel a hand on our shoulder one more time before the light goes out for good. And with that, this story comes to an end. Let's move on to the next one. The old theater still sells tickets for performances that ended in 1943. I took the job at the Grand Lyric Theater because no one else would. The city had acquired the building through eminent domain after the last owner died interstate, and the Parks Department needed someone to do basic maintenance, sweep the lobby, check for water damage, keep the rodents out, until the city council decided whether to demolish it or attempt a historic restoration. The pay was minimum wage, but it was cash under the table, and after my photography business collapsed last winter, I wasn't in a position to be choosy. The foreman who hired me, a weary man named Carl with permanent shadows under his eyes, handed me a ring of heavy iron keys and said only this: "The box office window stays locked. Don't open it. Don't look inside it. Just check the doors, sweep the floors, and leave by 5. And whatever you do, don't go into the auditorium after dark." The Grand Lyric stood on the edge of downtown like a forgotten monument. Built in 1927 in the atmospheric style popular at the time, its facade was a crumbling fantasy of Spanish courtyards and starry skies, ornate plaster arches framing empty windows, wrought iron lanterns hanging dark and dead. The marquee still bore faded letters spelling out a show that hadn't run in 80 years. The Dreaming Hour, a musical fantasy. Vines had crept up the brickwork, threading through broken panes of glass, reclaiming the structure for the earth. It was beautiful in the way graveyards are beautiful, haunting, silent, heavy with stories no one remembered anymore. My first day, I arrived at 9 a.m. with a broom and a trash bag. The front doors groaned open on rusted hinges, exhaling a breath of stale air that carried the faint, sweet scent of decayed velvet and old wood. The lobby was a cavern of shadows, dust motes dancing in the weak light, filtering through grimy windows. Red carpet, once plush, was now threadbare and stiff with age. Gilt-framed portraits of forgotten actors stared down with painted eyes that seemed to follow me as I moved. And at the far end of the lobby, beneath a faded mural of celestial nymphs dancing among clouds, was the box office, a small cage-like structure with ornate brass bars and a sliding window. The window was closed, locked. just as Carl had said. But taped to the outside of the glass was a small handwritten sign on yellowed paper. Today's performance, 8 p.m. orchestra. Seating, $1.25. Balcony, 75 cents. No, late admission after 8:15. I stared at it for a full minute. The ink was faded but legible. The paper was brittle at the edges. This wasn't a prank. It looked decades old. I checked the date on my phone. October 17th, 2025. I took a photo of the sign and texted it to Carl. His reply came 30 seconds later. Don't touch it. Don't acknowledge it. Just do your job and leave. I spent the morning sweeping dust and dead leaves from the lobby floor. The theater was eerily quiet, not just silent, but acoustically dead, as if the very air absorbed sound. My footsteps made no echo. My breathing seemed muffled. At noon, I sat on the edge of a moth-eaten velvet seat in the very back of the auditorium and ate a sandwich, staring at the stage. The curtain was drawn, a heavy burgundy velvet embroidered with gold thread, now faded to the color of dried blood. The seats fanned out in perfect arcs, hundreds of them, all empty, all waiting. I felt a strange pull toward the stage, a compulsion to walk down the center aisle and step onto that boards, but something in Carl's warning held me back. I finished my sandwich and returned to sweeping. At 4:55 p.m., as I was gathering my things to leave, I heard it, a soft chime, like a small bell ringing once, clear, delicate. It came from the direction of the box office. I froze, my keys jangling in my hand. The theater had been silent all day. There were no working electrical systems, no bells. I stood perfectly still, listening. Nothing. I told myself it was my imagination, the wind finding a loose pipe, my mind playing tricks in the oppressive quiet. I was 5 feet from the front doors when I heard it again. This time, followed by the soft, rhythmic scrape of metal on metal, the sound of a ticket window sliding open. My blood went cold. I turned slowly. The box office window was open, just a few inches, and through the gap I saw a sliver of darkness and the faint gleam of brass ticket dispensers inside. I should have run. I should have fled the building and never returned. But I was a photographer. My entire life had been built on the principle of bearing witness. And something in that dark theater was inviting me to witness. I walked toward the box office as if pulled by a string tied to my sternum. My footsteps made no sound on the carpet. I stopped directly in front of the window. From this angle, I could see inside. The space was small, cramped, lined with wooden shelves holding neat stacks of ticket stubs. And behind the counter, barely visible in the gloom, was a figure, an old man in a vest and bow tie, his back to me, meticulously organizing something on the counter. "Hello?" My voice was a whisper, swallowed instantly by the dead air. The figure didn't turn, but the sliding window moved smoothly, silently, opening another inch. On the counter, directly in my line of sight, lay a single ticket, cream-colored cardstock, embossed lettering. It read, Orchestra, Row G, Seat 12, 8 p.m., the dreaming hour. Beneath the show title in smaller print, Final Performance, October 17th, 1943. My breath caught. Today's date, 82 years ago. The window slid shut with a soft click. The lock engaged with an audible turn of a key from the other side. The theater was silent again. I stood there for a full minute, my heart hammering against my ribs. Then I fled, not stopping until I was 3 blocks away, leaning against a brick wall, gasping for air. I didn't return the next day, or the day after. I told Carl I had the flu. He didn't press me. On the 4th morning, curiosity, or something darker, drew me back. I arrived at 8 a.m., the autumn sun still low in the sky. The theater looked the same, silent, waiting. I unlocked the doors with trembling hands and stepped inside. The ticket was on the floor directly beneath the box office window, cream-colored, pristine, as if placed there moments before. I picked it up. The paper was cool to the touch, real, tangible. I turned it over. On the back, in faint pencil, someone had written, "He's waiting for you in row G." I crumpled the ticket and threw it into my bag. I spent the day working furiously, scrubbing floors, wiping dust from banisters, trying to exorcise the unease with physical labor. But my eyes kept drifting to the auditorium doors, to row G, seat 12. At 4:58 p.m., I was standing by the front doors with my keys in hand when the chime rang again. Once, clear and delicate. I didn't run this time. I walked slowly toward the box office. The window was already open. On the counter sat 2 tickets side by side. I reached through the bars and took them. My fingers brushed against something cold and dry on the other side of the counter, a hand. I jerked back with a gasp, but there was no one there, just the tickets in my palm. I sat in the lobby for an hour after the sun went down, the tickets resting on my knee. The rational part of my mind screamed at me to leave, but another part, the part that had spent years chasing ghosts through my camera lens trying to capture what others couldn't see, was captivated. What if this was real? What if the veil was thin here and I had been chosen as a witness? Photographers document history. What if I could document this? At 7:45 p.m., I stood and walked into the auditorium. The air changed the moment I crossed the threshold. It grew cooler, damper, carrying the faint scent of perfume and cigar smoke, the smells of another era. The seats were no longer dusty and decayed. They gleamed under the soft glow of working sconces along the walls. The carpet was plush and deep red. The murals on the ceiling, painted constellations and drifting clouds, seemed to shift subtly in my peripheral vision, as if alive. I walked down the center aisle, my footsteps silent on the fresh carpet. Row G was 7 rows from the stage. Seat 12 was on the aisle. I sat. The theater filled slowly, not with a crowd rushing in, but with presences materializing in the seats around me. Men in suits and fedoras, women in elegant dresses with gloves and pearls, children sitting quietly between their parents. None of them looked at me. None of them seemed to notice I was there. They were translucent at first, shimmering like heat haze, then solidified into full color and detail. The air grew warm with their collective presence. The murmur of conversation rose around me, polite, excited chatter about the show, about the chick drive downtown, about Mrs. Henderson's new hat. I could smell their cologne, their hair pomade, the faint metallic scent of the coins in their pockets. At 8:00 p.m. sharp, the house lights dimmed. A hush fell over the audience. From the wings, an orchestra began to play, a lush, romantic overture that swelled through the auditorium, rich with strings and woodwinds. The curtain rose. The stage was set as a moonlit garden, with painted backdrops of cypress trees and a starry sky. actors in period costumes moved through their scenes with practiced grace, their voices carrying effortlessly to the back row without amplification. It was beautiful, hauntingly beautiful, and utterly profoundly wrong. Because as I watched, I noticed something. The actors weren't just performing, they were repeating the same lines, the same gestures, the same pauses. A man in a white suit would step to center stage, deliver his monologue about lost love, pause for exactly 3 seconds as if waiting for a cue, then exit stage left. A woman in a blue gown would enter from the opposite side, deliver her response to his departed monologue, pause for 3 seconds, and exit. They were trapped in a loop, a perfect, unbroken loop of a performance that had ended 82 years ago. And then I saw him, sitting 3 seats down from me in row G, an old man in a vest and bow tie, the same man I'd seen in the box office. He wasn't watching the stage, he was watching me. His face was kind, lined with age and sorrow. He gave me a small, sad smile and patted the empty seat between us. I didn't move. I couldn't. The performance continued its endless cycle on stage. The audience around me laughed and cried at the appropriate moments, their reactions perfectly synchronized with the action. They were a part of the loop, too, trapped, preserved. And the old man kept patting that empty seat, his eyes pleading. During intermission, the orchestra played a gentle waltz while ushers moved through the aisles with trays of champagne flutes that shimmered with impossible light. I finally stood and walked toward him. The other audience members didn't react to my movement. They simply continued their conversations, sipping phantom champagne, unaware of my presence. I sat in the empty seat between us. The old man turned to me. His eyes were the color of faded denim, his hands gnarled with arthritis. "My name is Arthur," he said, his voice soft but clear. "I was the box office manager. October 17th, 1943 was opening night. The show was, well, it wasn't good. The critics were coming. We all knew it would close after this run, but the owner, Mr. Sterling, was desperate. He'd invested everything, so he made a bargain." Arthur's gaze drifted to the stage where actors were frozen mid-scene during the intermission. "He didn't believe in God or the devil. He believed in something older, something that lives in places where people gather to dream together. He offered it a trade, eternal performances in exchange for one successful run. 1 month of sold-out shows the entity accepted, but it misunderstood the terms. Or perhaps it understood them perfectly. The show ran for 1 month, every seat sold, every night. But when the final curtain fell on November 17th, the audience couldn't leave. The actors couldn't leave. None of us could leave. We became part of the performance forever. He turned back to me, his eyes glistening. But the bargain had a loophole. The entity feeds on witnesses, on fresh eyes, seeing the show for the first time. Without new audience members, the loop weakens. The presences fade. We've been waiting so long for someone to buy a ticket, to sit in the dark and watch, to give us one more night of purpose before the light finally goes out. I looked around the auditorium. The faces of the audience were no longer vibrant. I could see through them now. The decayed seats beneath their forms, the dust motes drifting through their translucent bodies. They were fading, starving. "Why me?" I whispered. Arthur smiled sadly. "You didn't run. Most do. The ones who hear the chime and see the ticket, they run and never return. But you came back. You sat down. You bore witness. That's all we ever wanted, to be seen just once more. The second act began. The actors moved through their scenes with renewed vigor, their forms solidifying as my attention fed them. I watched the entire performance. The tragic romance, the mistaken identities, the final reconciliation under the painted stars. I laughed when the audience laughed. I wiped tears from my eyes during the poignant finale. And when the curtain fell for the last time that night, I stood and applauded with the rest of the audience, my hand stinging from the force of my clapping. The lights came up. The audience began to fade, not vanishing abruptly, but dissolving like mist in morning sun. They turned to me as they disappeared, their faces peaceful, grateful. Arthur was the last to go. He stood before me, his form barely visible now. "Thank you," he whispered. "We can rest now." And then he was gone. The theater snapped back to its true state, decayed, dusty, silent. The seats were rotting. The carpet was threadbare. The stage curtain hung in tatters. I was alone. I walked out of the Grand Lyric Theater at 10:17 p.m. The city lights glittered in the distance. I felt hollowed out, but also cleansed, like I'd participated in a sacred ritual I didn't fully understand. I returned the next day, and the day after that. The ticket appeared each afternoon at 4:58 p.m., resting on the floor beneath the box office window. I'd pick it up, walk into the auditorium at 7:55 p.m., and sit in row G, seat 12. The performance would begin at 8. The audience would materialize around me. Arthur would sit 3 seats down and smile, and for 2 hours I would bear witness to their eternal loop. Each night they faded a little more quickly after the curtain fell. Each night their gratitude felt more profound. On the 7th night, something changed. As the final curtain fell and the audience began to dissolve, Arthur didn't fade with them. He remained, his form solid and clear. He walked up the aisle toward me, his footsteps silent on the rotting carpet. "It's time," he said softly. "The loop is broken. We're free to move on, all of us, except one." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "The bargain requires a caretaker," he explained, his voice gentle. "Someone to sell the tickets, to welcome the next witness when the time comes. Mr. Sterling was the first, I was the second. And you've sat through 7 performances. You've fed us with your attention. You've earned the role." I shook my head, backing toward the aisle. "No, I'm leaving. I'm never coming back." Arthur didn't block my path. He simply stood there, his expression sorrowful. "You can leave. Of course you can leave. But ask yourself this. Where will you go? Back to your empty apartment? To a world that has no place for a man who sees ghosts in theater seats? Or will you stay here, where you are needed, where your witnessing has meaning?" He gestured around the decaying auditorium. "This isn't a prison. It's a purpose. Someone must keep the dream alive until the next witness arrives. Decades may pass, centuries even, but someone must be here to slide open the window, to place the ticket on the counter, to ensure the performance continues until it can finally, truly end." I ran that night. I didn't return for 2 weeks. I tried to rebuild my life, to find another job, to reconnect with friends who drifted away during my divorce, but everything felt flat, meaningless. The world had lost its texture, its mystery. I dreamed of velvet seats and painted stars. I woke each morning at 7:55 a.m., my body aching with the need to be somewhere I refused to name. On the 15th night, I stood outside the Grand Lyric Theater at 7:50 p.m. The marquee still read "The Dreaming Hour." The vines still climbed the brickwork, but now I saw the beauty in the decay, the dignity in the waiting. I unlocked the doors. The air inside was cool and still. I walked to the box office, my keys heavy in my hand. I unlocked the sliding window and pushed it open. Inside, the brass ticket dispensers gleamed as if freshly polished. Stacks of cream-colored tickets waited on the shelves. I took one and placed it on the counter. Then I slid the window shut. At 7:58 p.m., I heard a soft footfall in the lobby. I slid the window open again. A young woman stood there, her face pale with curiosity and fear. She looked exactly as I had looked 3 weeks ago, drawn by something she couldn't name, compelled to witness what shouldn't exist. I smiled at her, a sad, gentle smile I'd learned from Arthur. I placed the ticket on the counter within her reach. "Orchestra seating," I said softly. "Row G, seat 12. The performance begins at 8. She hesitated, her eyes wide. Then she reached through the bars and took the ticket. Her fingers brushed against mine, warm, alive, trembling. She turned and walked toward the auditorium doors without looking back. I watched her go. Then I closed the window, locked it, and sat down on the stool behind the counter. I have all night to wait, and tomorrow I'll sweep the lobby, check for water damage, and place another ticket on the counter at 4:58 p.m. The old theater still sells tickets for performances that ended in 1943, and now so do I. Not because I'm trapped, but because some dreams are too beautiful to let die, and some of us are born not to live our own lives, but to keep other people's dreams alive, one ticket, one witness, one performance at a time. The chime will ring again tomorrow and the next day, and the day after that, until the world forgets how to dream, until even ghosts grow tired of waiting. But not tonight. Tonight, the curtain rises at 8, and somewhere in row G, a stranger, is learning what it means to bear witness, just as I did, just as Arthur did before me, just as someone will do long after I'm gone. The show must go on. It always does. And I, the keeper of tickets, the guardian of dreams, will be here to ensure it. Always. And this story ends here. The next one begins now. The attic door opens only when someone in the house is asleep. I should have known something was wrong the moment Mrs. Gable handed me the keys. Her fingers were cold and papery, and she wouldn't meet my eyes when she said the rent was $300 a month for the entire second floor of a Victorian house in a neighborhood that, while not exactly thriving, certainly wasn't the kind of place where rooms went for less than a third of the market rate. But I was desperate. My savings had evaporated after the layoff. My car had finally given up the ghost on the interstate last month, and the prospect of couch surfing with friends who were already politely avoiding my calls was becoming a real possibility. $300 was a miracle. I didn't ask enough questions. The house stood on Sycamore Street, a row of once grand homes built in the 1890s, their gingerbread trim peeling, their wraparound porches sagging under the weight of decades. Mrs. Gable's property was the worst of them. A 3-story structure painted a faded, chipped gray that might have once been white. The windows on the 3rd floor, the attic level, were boarded up with warped plywood. She explained this as she showed me the place, her voice a dry rustle. Previous tenant had a problem with raccoons getting in through the eaves. Nasty business. We just sealed it off. You won't need that space anyway. 2nd floor is more than enough for one person. The 2nd floor was, in fact, spacious. 2 bedrooms, a small bathroom with clawfoot tub, and a sitting area with a bay window overlooking the overgrown front yard. The wood floors creaked with a familiar, almost comforting rhythm underfoot. The air smelled of lemon polish and dust, a combination that suggested neglect but not filth. Mrs. Gable had clearly made an effort to present it as livable. She pointed out the thermostat, the breaker box in the hall closet, the quirks of the old plumbing. She mentioned nothing about the attic beyond, the raccoon story. As she was leaving, her hand on the doorknob, she paused and turned back. "One thing," she said, her eyes finally lifting to mine, and in that brief contact, I saw something that wasn't quite fear, but a deep, weary caution. "The door to the attic stairs is at the end of the hall. It's always kept locked. Please don't try to open it. The lock is particular, and the stairs themselves are rotten in places. It's not safe." Then she was gone, leaving me alone in the echoing quiet of my new, suspiciously affordable home. The first few days were uneventful. I settled in, dragging my few boxes of belongings up the narrow staircase from the street-level entrance Mrs. Gable had designated for me. I learned the house's rhythms, the groan of the floorboards as the afternoon sun warmed the west side, the whisper of wind through a loose shingle on the roof, the distant hum of traffic that faded to nothing after midnight. I slept deeply those first nights, the exhaustion of unemployment and anxiety finally catching up with me. I woke each morning to the gray light filtering through the bay window, the house silent and still. It was on the 4th morning that I noticed it. I'd woken early, around 6, to use the bathroom. As I padded down the hall in my socks, I saw it immediately, the attic door. It was a narrow paneled door set into the wall at the far end of the hallway, almost hidden in the shadow of a bend in the corridor. Mrs. Gable had shown it to me, emphasizing its locked state. But now, in the dim morning light, it was open. Not wide open, just a crack, perhaps 3 inches, enough to reveal not darkness, but a sliver of dusty, slanted floorboards and the bottom rung of a pull-down staircase. My heart did a quick, hard thump against my ribs. I approached slowly, my bare feet silent on the wood. I peered through the gap. The space beyond was an unfinished attic, filled with the vague shapes of old furniture covered in yellowed sheets. Dust, motes danced in a thin beam of light coming from a crack in the boarded window on the far wall. It looked exactly like what it was, an abandoned storage space, but it was open. Mrs. Gable had been explicit. Locked. Always locked. I reached out, my fingers trembling slightly, and pushed the door the rest of the way open. The pulled-down stairs were extended, resting on the hallway floor with a faint scuff mark on the wood where the metal edge had touched. I climbed the first 2 steps, the wood groaning under my weight. The air was thick with the smell of dry rot and old paper. I saw a rocking chair draped in a sheet, a stack of steamer trunks, the skeletal remains of a child's bicycle. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. After a minute, Feeling foolish but unsettled, I climbed back down, retracted the stairs with a stiff pull on the cord, and closed the door. It clicked shut. I turned the knob. It was unlocked. I jiggled it, solid. I left it closed and went back to bed, telling myself I must have misremembered Mrs. Gable's instructions. Maybe she'd just said it was usually kept locked. Maybe the previous tenant had left it open. It was an old house. Things shifted. That evening, after a dinner of canned soup eaten at the small table in my sitting area, I made a point of checking the door again. It was closed. I turned the knob. Locked. I could feel the deadbolt engaging. I tried it again firmly. Definitely locked. I went to bed that night with the incident filed away as a minor mystery, the kind of thing old houses do. I woke at 2:17 a.m. to the sound of my own name. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a shout. It was a whisper, so faint it might have been the house settling, the wind finding a new gap in the window frame. But it was my name, Elias. Just once, clear as anything. I lay frozen in bed, my breath caught in my throat. The digital clock on my nightstand glowed 2:18. The house was silent again. Absolute silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, intentional. After 10 minutes of straining my ears until they ached, I convinced myself it had been a dream. A hypnagogic jerk of the mind as I drifted between sleep stages. I rolled over and eventually fell back into a fitful sleep. The next morning, I checked the attic door before I even brushed my teeth. It was open again, the same 3-inch gap. The pull-down stairs extended, resting on the hall floor. My blood ran cold. This was no dream. This was real. I stood there for a full minute, not moving, just staring at that sliver of shadowy space. Then, with a surge of anger that masked my fear, I strode forward, yanked the door fully open, and stomped up the stairs into the attic. "Hello?" My voice was too loud in the dusty stillness. "Is someone up here?" I walked through the maze of sheet-draped furniture, pulling covers off trunks, peering behind the skeletal bicycle. Nothing. No hiding places, no secret passages, just dust and decay, and the faint, rhythmic ticking of a water pipe somewhere in the walls. I was alone, completely alone. I stood in the center of the room, my heart hammering, and yelled, "This isn't funny!" The words echoed dully and died. I felt ridiculous and terrified. I descended, retracted the stairs, closed the door, and this time I didn't just check the lock. I jammed a heavy wooden doorstop I found in my closet beneath the door. A physical barrier, something I could trust more than a flimsy lock. I went to work, part-time stocking shelves at a grocery store I'd taken out of sheer necessity, and tried to put it out of my mind. But the image of that open door haunted me all day. That night, I was determined to stay awake. I drank coffee until 10 p.m., then switched to tea. I read a novel with the lamp on high, the words blurring as my eyes grew heavy despite my efforts. I watched a movie on my laptop, the volume turned up to fill the silence. But exhaustion is a powerful tide. Sometime after midnight, my head nodded forward. I jerked awake, my neck stiff. The movie had ended, the screen gone black. The house was silent. I checked my phone. 1:45 a.m. I was still awake. Barely. I decided to make a cup of tea to jolt myself fully alert. I crept down the hall toward the small kitchenette area at the top of the main stairs. As I passed the attic door, I glanced at it automatically. The doorstop was still firmly wedged beneath it. Relief washed over me. I was awake. The door was secure. Whatever was happening, it required sleep. The thought was absurd, but it fit the pattern. Open when I woke, locked when I was awake, and checked it in the evening. Open again in the morning. Sleep was the variable. I made my tea, the click of the kettle unnaturally loud. I carried the steaming mug back down the hall, my eyes fixed on the attic door. Still closed, still blocked. I sat on the edge of my bed, sipping the hot liquid, feeling a fragile sense of control. I would stay awake until dawn. I would break the cycle. But the tea was warm and soothing. The room was dark and quiet. My body, deprived of proper rest for days, betrayed me. I set the mug on the nightstand. I lay back against the pillows, telling myself I would just rest my eyes for a minute. Just a minute. I dreamed of climbing stairs. Not the pull-down stairs to the attic, but a grand curving staircase made of dark wood, leading up into a soft golden light. Someone was waiting for me at the top. I could feel their presence warm and welcoming. I climbed faster, eager to reach them. My foot slipped on a loose carpet runner. I stumbled forward, catching myself on the banister. When I looked up, the golden light was gone. The staircase now led into absolute blackness, and from that blackness came a sound, a slow, rhythmic creaking, like a rocking chair moving back and forth on an uneven floor. I woke with a gasp. The room was dark. The digital clock read 4:03 a.m. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. The dream clung to me, vivid and unsettling. And then I heard it. From the hallway, the soft, distinct sound of wood scraping against wood. A slow, deliberate creak. Pause. Creak. Pause. The rocking chair. I lay paralyzed, every muscle locked. The sound continued for perhaps 30 seconds. Creak. Pause. Creak. Pause. Then it stopped. Silence returned, thicker and more menacing than before. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I waited for what felt like an hour, though the clock only advanced to 4:11. Finally, driven by a compulsion I couldn't name, a need to confirm the horror or disprove it, I threw back the covers and crept to my bedroom door. I eased it open an inch and peered into the hall. The attic door was closed, but the doorstop was no longer beneath it. It lay on its side 3 feet away, as if kicked aside. My blood turned to ice. I didn't approach the door. I didn't check if it was locked. I simply backed into my room, closed the door, and pushed my heavy dresser in front of it. I spent the rest of the night sitting upright in bed, my back against the wall, watching the sliver of darkness beneath my door, waiting for it to widen. Morning came, gray and ordinary. Sunlight filtered through the window. Birds chirped outside. The house was silent. After an hour of sitting there, trembling, I finally worked up the courage to move the dresser. I opened my door and stepped into the hall. The attic door was closed. I approached it slowly, my body tense. I knelt and peered the floor. No scuff marks, no sign the door had been opened in the night. I turned the knob. It was locked. I tried the doorstop, placing it carefully back in position. It held firm. I called Mrs. Gable. Her phone rang 12 times before going to a crackling voicemail. I left a message, my voice tight and controlled, asking about the history of the house, specifically the attic. I mentioned nothing about the door opening. I just said I was curious about the previous tenants. She didn't call back. I spent the day in a state of hypervigilance. Every creak of the house made me jump. I researched the address on my phone, scrolling through property records and old newspaper archives. I found nothing about deaths or tragedies, just a series of owners stretching back to the 1920s. The house had been in Mrs. Gable's family since 1947. Her grandfather had built it. I found a grainy black and white photo from 1952. A stern-looking man with Mrs. Gable's same sharp nose standing on the porch, a young woman beside him holding a little girl's hand. The little girl was looking up at the third-floor windows, her face tilted in what might have been a smile or a frown. The caption read, "Arthur and Eleanor Gable with daughter Clara, 1952. Clara. The name stuck with me. That night, I devised a new plan. I set up my phone on a tripod in the hallway, aimed directly at the attic door. I activated the video recording function with night vision enabled. I placed the doorstop firmly in place. I went to bed with the bedroom door open, a baseball bat I'd bought that afternoon resting against the nightstand. I would have proof. I would see what happened. I fell asleep almost immediately from sheer exhaustion. I woke to my alarm at 7 a.m., my body heavy with unrefreshing sleep. The first thing I did was grab my phone and stop the recording. My hand shook as I scrolled back through the footage. The first hour was boring, just the empty hallway, the doorstop firmly in place. At 11:47 p.m., I appeared on screen, shuffling to the bathroom in my pajamas, then back to my room. Then nothing, just the silent hallway. At 2:18 a.m., something happened. The video didn't show the door opening. It showed the doorstop. At 2:18:03 a.m., the wooden wedge simply slid away. Not kicked, not pushed by a visible foot. It slid smoothly across the hardwood floor, coming to rest exactly where I'd found it that morning, 3 feet from the door. At 2:18:07, the attic door began to swing inward, slowly, silently. No hand touched it. No draft was visible. It opened to the same 3-inch gap and stopped. The camera's night vision rendered everything in grainy green and black. For 17 minutes, nothing moved. Then at 2:35:22, the door began to close. Again, no visible force. It swung shut with a soft click that the microphone barely picked up. At 2:35:25, the doorstop slid back across the floor, returning to its original position directly beneath the door. I watched the clip 3 times. My stomach churned. There was no trick, no string, no vibration from a passing truck. The timestamp showed no corresponding movement in the rest of the frame. The door opened and closed on its own. The doorstop moved on its own, and the timing was precise. It happened while I was asleep. I checked my own sleep tracker app. Deep sleep phase, 2:15 a.m. to 3:40 a.m. The attic door opens only when someone in the house is asleep. The phrase echoed in my mind, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. Oh, rule, a law of this house. I couldn't stay. I packed a bag with essentials, clothes, my laptop, my passport. I would leave the rest. I would sleep in my car if I had to. As I zipped the bag, my eyes kept drifting to the attic door at the end of the hall, closed, locked, innocent. But I knew what it was now, a threshold, and it only opened when the guardian, me, was unconscious, vulnerable. I hefted my bag and walked toward the front stairs, my keys in my hand. I was 3 steps from the attic door when I stopped. A sound came from the other side, not a creak this time, a whisper, faint, sibilant, pressing against the wood like smoke. Elias! It was my name again, but this time it wasn't a question. It was an invitation, a promise, and beneath it, almost subliminal, I heard another sound, the soft, rhythmic creak of a rocking chair. My feet were rooted to the floor. My rational mind screamed at me to run, to get out of the house and never look back. But another part of me, a deeper, more ancient part, was curious. What waited up there? What wanted me so badly that it could only approach when my conscious mind was absent? Was it malevolent, or was it just lonely? The dream of the golden light returned to me, warring with the image of the black staircase. I took a step toward the door, then another. My hand rose trembling toward the knob. I knew it would be unlocked. I knew if I turned it, the door would open. I knew I shouldn't. But the whisper came again, softer now, almost a sigh. So tired? And I realized with a jolt of icy clarity that it wasn't trying to lure me up there. It was telling me how it felt. Trapped, waiting. For how long? Since 1952? Since Clara? My fingers brushed the cold brass of the knob. I thought of Mrs. Gable's weary eyes. Her warning, not "don't go up there," but "don't open the door." She knew. She'd always known. This wasn't a haunting to be solved or a ghost to be banished. It was a condition of the house, a symbiotic horror. The door opened when you slept because that was the only time the boundary between worlds grew thin enough for it to reach through. And it had been reaching for decades for anyone who slept under this roof. I turned the knob. It was unlocked. The door swung inward without a sound, wider than before. The pull-down stairs were extended, but the attic beyond was different. The dust was gone. The sheet-draped furniture was gone. In their place was a small, cozy room lit by morning sun streaming through an unboarded window. A woman in a floral dress from the 1950s sat in a rocking chair, her back to me, gently moving back and forth. On the floor beside her, a little girl with blonde curls played with a wooden doll. The air smelled of baking bread and lavender. The woman stopped rocking. She didn't turn around. She simply said, her voice warm and sad, "You shouldn't have opened it while you were awake, Elias. Now you see what I have to offer, and you'll never be able to leave." I tried to step back, to slam the door, but my body wouldn't obey. My feet were leaden. The little girl looked up from her doll and smiled at me. Her eyes were the same sharp gray as Mrs. Gable's. The woman in the rocking chair began to move again. Creak, pause, creak, pause. And with each creak, the hallway behind me seemed to stretch, the door to my bedroom receding into impossible distance. The sun in the attic room grew brighter, warmer. The smell of lavender filled my lungs. A profound drowsiness washed over me, deeper than any fatigue I'd ever known. My eyelids grew heavy, so heavy. The last thing I saw before my eyes closed was the little girl standing up, holding out her hand to me. The last thing I heard was the gentle creak of the rocking chair, a lullaby pulling me down into a sleep from which I knew with absolute certainty I would never wake. And as consciousness faded, I understood the final, terrible truth of the house on Sycamore Street. The attic door didn't open when someone was asleep. It opened to make sure someone would never wake up again. The sleep was not the condition for the door to open. The sleep was the door's purpose. And I had walked right through it.